Chapter 923. The conference room in Utopia's military camp was filled with a messy fragrance. 3 piles of immortal herbs that Zhang Peng had prepared were placed on the table. The immortal herbs that Yu Qianqiu had asked him to prepare for refining the Great Restriction Breaking Pill, Marrow Cleansing Pill, and Immortal Ascension Pill were all ready. Yu Qianqiu stood to the side and compared the 3 piles of immortal herbs with the pill formula Jade Archive. After confirming that there were no mistakes, he cradled the pill formula Jade Archive and memorized the refining methods for the 3 immortal pills. Only after he had memorized them did he put away the Jade Archive. Looking at the 3 piles of immortal herbs on the table, Yu Qianqiu silently demonstrated the refining process in his mind. After confirming that he was confident, he heaved a sigh of relief. Master was going to start refining the pills. Zhang Peng's face was filled with excitement. He had long heard from Guan Yu that his master's pill refining skills had already reached an extraordinary level. Even Utopia's #1 pill refining expert, Chen Feng, had said that compared to his master in the field of pill refining, it was like comparing a grain of rice to a bright moon. It was a pity that he had never seen it before. He didn't expect to see it with his own eyes today. Just as Zhang Peng subconsciously stepped back to make room, Yu Qianqiu waved his hand with a calm expression. The wind from his palm swept up close to 20 immortal herbs on the table. At the same time, light green flames shot out from Yu Qianqiu's palm like a tornado, separating the 20 immortal herbs into 3 piles in the air. Nearly 20 stalks of immortal grass melted into a paste at a visible speed, squirming together. Suddenly, the faint green flame spun even faster, and the paste wrapped within it turned into a series of afterimages, spinning at high speed. Refining 3 immortal pills at the same time. Oh my God! Zhang Peng was dumbfounded. He had been in Utopia for a long time and had interacted with Chen Feng for a long time. He knew a little about pill refining, but this was the first time he had seen such a method of refining pills without using a furnace. 1 palm of fire controlled the refinement of 3 immortal pills and close to 20 immortal herbs. There was no need to elaborate on the complicated changes. Zhang Peng finally understood what it meant to be at the pinnacle of perfection. It would not be an exaggeration to describe his master's ability to control fire as extraordinary. Suddenly, the swirling flames began to release waves of gray mist. Zhang Peng knew that this was the essence left behind after the impurities within the immortal herbs were removed. As the impurities were removed, the swirling shadows inside gradually brightened, turning into colorful ribbons that danced in the air. As the impurities were removed, the colors became brighter and brighter, like shooting stars dancing in the sky. When there were no more impurities being expelled, the light green flames suddenly stopped spinning. Almost 20 glittering and resplendent liquid beads of different colors were like stars hanging in the night sky, slowly spinning according to the remaining inertia. After it stopped floating in the air, it seemed to be even more beautiful than the brightest gems. It was clear, bright, colorful, and beautiful in an instant. Zhang Peng slowly exhaled. He had been holding his breath since the beginning, not even daring to breathe loudly. Just as he let out a sigh of relief, the nearly 20 colorful liquid crystal beads suddenly collided with each other and killed each other. Such a beautiful thing was destroyed, and Zhang Peng felt a little heartache. The liquid beads continuously collided, fused, and separated. The light green flame was like an executioner adding fuel to the fire, constantly stirring them up. By the time the light green flame began to rotate in a regular pattern, there were only 18 of the nearly 20 clusters of liquid crystal beads left in the upper, middle, and lower layers. Their shapes were similar to amber, and they were very beautiful. There were 3, 6, and 9 beads respectively. The top 3 beads were golden and as big as fists, the middle 6 beads were the size of chicken eggs, and the bottom 9 beads were the size of chicken eggs. The 3, 6, and 9 beads were arranged in a pyramid formation. Zhang Peng had personally picked out the immortal herbs according to the pill recipe. He could roughly make out what they were. The 3 golden ones were immortal ascension pills, the 6 brown ones were marrow cleansing pills, and the 9 black ones were restriction breaking pills. Just as he was counting, the 18 beads of liquid beads began to roll up and down like waves. Zhang Peng understood that this was the final baking stage. Normally, when a pill was refined to this stage, it would be a foregone conclusion. Most pills would not be wasted. The color of the light green flame gradually deepened. Yu Qianqiu slightly increased the temperature of the fire, and the 18 beads of liquid beads gradually shrank until they were the size of quail eggs. Then, the roasting flame spun rapidly, and 18 three-colored immortal pills immediately popped out. Zhang Peng stretched out his hands and directly sucked the 18 immortal pills into his palms. Yu Qianqiu clenched his fingers, and the green flame was completely absorbed into his body. A refreshing fragrance began to emit from Zhang Peng's hands. Just taking a few more sniffs would make one feel refreshed. Wow! This is my first time refining. There isn't even a single waste pill. No wonder they said that Master's alchemy skills are extraordinary. Zhang Peng looked at the 18 scorching hot immortal pills in his hands and was secretly speechless. He looked up at Yu Qianqiu and said enviously, Master, I heard that you once held 10 layers in each hand and refined 20 cauldrons of pills at the same time in Ethereal Palace. Is that true? 20 cauldrons? Yu Qianqiu was stunned. He recalled that he had indeed done that in Ethereal Palace. Looking at the immortal pills in Zhang Peng's hands, Yu Qianqiu smiled and said, I did do that when I was in the early stage of tribulation passing. But now, he smiled but did not say anything. He felt that there was nothing to brag about in front of his disciple. Back then, when he refined 20 cauldrons with both hands, his cultivation was only in the early stage of tribulation passing. Now that he was the strongest expert in the world in the late stage of soul formation, the difference between his cultivation and that of the past was like heaven and earth. If he were to use his full strength, he wouldn't dare to say that he could refine 100 cauldrons at the same time. Zhang Peng's heart skipped a beat. He vaguely guessed the hidden meaning behind Yu Qianqiu's words. He immediately begged with a bitter face, Master, why don't you teach me your alchemy skills? Yu Qianqiu was slightly stunned. He remembered that apart from passing the Guiyuan sword technique to them, he really did not care about them anymore. He had been busy with other things. But if he wanted to teach them the alchemy skills, he must first teach them the Starflame fire technique. But this technique could easily cause a big fuss. After a moment of silence, Yu Qianqiu put away the immortal pills in Zhang Peng's hands and said in a low voice, Alchemy has no benefits when fighting enemies. How about this? 100 kilometers to the east, I'll wait for you there. I'll teach you a great technique. With that said, he disappeared from the house. Zhang Peng's mouth was agape. He didn't expect that his master would teach him a great technique just because he said it casually. On second thought, he felt a little ashamed. His master was busy with important matters, but he said something like that. He really shouldn't have said that. Thinking about it, he was still extremely excited, and he dashed outside. After dashing out of Utopia's military camp, he immediately flew east. When he arrived 100 kilometers to the east, he realized that there were 2 people waiting for him. When he landed, he realized that his senior brother, Hong Qi, was also there. At that moment, Hong Qi was already a stalwart man. He had a dignified appearance, and coupled with the fact that he had been in charge of the Hong gang for many years, he more or less exuded the aura of a leader. However, as Yu Qianqiu was standing at the side, he didn't dare to show any aura. His master was the #1 expert in the world. Therefore, he obediently hid at the side. He. Junior brother, you're here. Hong Qi smiled wretchedly. Although he was much older than Zhang Peng, there was nothing he could do about it. He had entered the sect earlier than Zhang Peng. Yu Qianqiu glanced at him. He couldn't stand how smug he was after taking advantage of Zhang Peng, so he immediately kicked his butt. Hong Qi's smirk instantly froze, and he obediently stood at the side with an awkward expression, not daring to even fart. Zhang Peng didn't take the opportunity to kick him while he was down. He still cupped his hands and greeted, Senior brother. Then, he stood beside Hong Qi and waited for his master's instructions. Yu Qianqiu looked into the distance calmly and said, Today, Zhang Peng mentioned imparting techniques. After some thought, I also feel that I should impart some things to you. As he said this, his expression became serious. He looked at the two of them and said with a serious expression, I have the 5 elements grand techniques of water, fire, metal, wood, and earth. Each of these techniques has extraordinary effects. I wish to impart them to the two of you. Are the two of you willing to cultivate them? Although he himself hadn't mastered the 5 elements grand techniques, he felt that as a master, he should act like a master. Therefore, he put on the airs of a master. However, he felt that it was a little strange to speak like this. 5 elements grand techniques? The two of them looked at each other and immediately revealed expressions of wild joy. They knelt in front of Yu Qianqiu and kowtowed excitedly, disciple is willing to cultivate it. I have some ugly words to say first. Yu Qianqiu stared at the two of them coldly and snorted, this 5 elements grand techniques is not ordinary. It is not allowed to be spread outside. Remember this. In the future, whether you teach disciples or pass it on to your own descendants, this technique can only be passed on to one person. If you dare to violate this, don't blame me for taking your lives. Do you understand? Disciple understands master's teachings. The two of them kowtowed again. Get up. After Yu Qianqiu called the two of them up, he didn't say anything else. He pointed his hand forward and the ground immediately shook violently. The two of them's expressions changed slightly. They saw that not far away from them, a hill that was nearly 100 meters tall had risen. The two of them were immediately stunned. Who has a flying sword? Yu Qianqiu asked. The two of them immediately woke up. Although they didn't know what their master was going to do, they both took out a flying sword. The two of them saw their master wave his sleeve and immediately felt the weight in their hands lighten. In front of their eyes, silver dust floated with the wind and the flying sword disappeared. Both of them had silently turned into silver dust. The two of them felt as if they were struck by lightning. Their hearts were extremely shocked. The two of them knew that their master's cultivation was high, but they didn't expect it to be so high. With a flick of his finger, a mountain could rise from the ground, and with a wave of his hand, metal could be turned into dust. His methods were so magical that it was indescribable. It was really too frightening and had already exceeded their imagination. The two of them looked at Yu Qianqiu with cold eyes. They were trembling with fear. They didn't expect their master to be so strong. Chapter 924. These are the metal conjuration art and earth conjuration art of the 5 elements. Both of you can only choose one each. Don't be greedy. Yu Qianqiu's gaze moved between the two of them. He asked indifferently, who will choose the metal conjuration art and who will choose the earth conjuration art? The two of them looked at each other and hesitated. In the end, Zhang Peng cupped his hands at Hong Qi and said, Senior apprentice brother, you choose first. Hong Qi chuckled. He wanted to choose first, but in front of his master, how could he not maintain the demeanor of a senior apprentice brother? He immediately cupped his hands and replied, Junior apprentice brother, you choose first. Senior apprentice brother should choose first. Junior apprentice brother should choose first. The two of them politely pushed the responsibility around, but they couldn't come up with a decision. Yu Qianqiu couldn't stand it anymore. He raised his eyebrows and snorted coldly, there's an order of seniority. Senior apprentice brother before junior apprentice brother. With this as the basis, the two of them naturally couldn't push the responsibility around anymore. Hong Qi smiled sheepishly and asked Zhang Peng for his opinion, should I choose the metal conjuration art? He often mingled in the human world and heard that Yu Qianqiu used the metal conjuration art to shock the cultivation world. Of course, he didn't know that it was the metal conjuration art before. Now that he knew, he couldn't help but covet it. All right. Then I'll choose the earth conjuration art. Zhang Peng agreed readily. After confirming their choices, the two of them looked at their master eagerly, waiting for his approval. Yu Qianqiu didn't interfere with their choice anymore. He said to Hong Qi, wait here obediently. Without waiting for Hong Qi's reply, he waved his sleeve at Zhang Peng and the two of them disappeared into thin air, leaving Hong Qi waiting alone. On the yellow plain of the eastern Holy Land, two people suddenly appeared. A gust of wind blew past, swirling the yellow dust around. Zhang Peng looked around, but he didn't know where he was. Yu Qianqiu waved his hand and pointed at the vast yellow plain. Remember, yellow soil is the best place to cultivate the earth's secret art. Without waiting for Zhang Peng's reply, Zhang Xian pointed his finger downward, and the yellow plains trembled. A crack tore open in the ground, and the master and disciple fell into it. After descending to a depth of nearly 100 meters, Yu Qianqiu pushed his palms to the left and right, and an underground space that was more than 10 meters wide instantly formed. Then, he put his palms together, and the cracks on both sides of the ground trembled again. Zhang Peng looked up at the sky in surprise and joy. The ray of light above him gradually disappeared, leaving the ground pitch black. Yu Qianqiu casually scattered a handful of fluorescent stones, and the spherical underground space suddenly lit up. The master and disciple then sat cross-legged facing each other. After Zhang Peng had calmed down and his mind was clear, Yu Qianqiu began to explain the cultivation method of the earth formula to Zhang Peng in detail. After Zhang Peng memorized and comprehended it, he immediately sat cross-legged and closed his eyes to enter a state of cultivation. Yu Qianqiu secretly returned to Utopia. In Utopia, Hong Qi, who had been waiting for a long time, was feeling gloomy about how much longer he had to wait. When he suddenly saw his master appear alone, he looked around and asked, "Master, where's junior brother Zhang Peng?" Yu Qianqiu didn't waste his breath on him. He enveloped him with his divine senses, and the two of them moved together. Hong Qi felt the scene before his eyes change, and he discovered that he was in a majestic and huge golden square. A golden altar stood in the middle of the golden square, appearing extremely mysterious. An ancient and vicissitude aura surged toward him from all directions. Hong Qi looked around and saw tall mountain basins surrounding the huge golden square, giving off a huge pressure. The strangest thing was that there were rainbow-colored clouds drifting in the sky above the mountain basins. However, they stayed in the sky above the mountain basins and didn't invade the mountain basins. Hong Qi had a nagging feeling that the rainbow-colored clouds were somewhat familiar. He suddenly thought of something and turned to ask in surprise, "Master, could this place be inside the fog forest? That rainbow-colored cloud is the soul transformation smoke. Even immortal cultivators from the immortal world will die with a single touch. I've never heard of a way to save them. You'd better behave yourself and not touch them. If anything happens, I won't be able to save you." Yu Qianqiu casually pointed to the altar in the middle of the golden square and said, "That's the legendary immortal ascension stage. Don't touch the things there. If you cause any trouble, I won't let you off. Do you hear me?" I'll remember," replied Hong Qi as he shrunk his head back. Speaking of the immortal ascension stage, he had naturally heard of the story of how the various countries had sent nearly 10,000 people to hunt down his master. In the end, his master had killed thousands of them, and in the end, his master had been forced to flee to this place. To think that his master would come to such a forbidden place as he wished. No wonder his master was the #1 expert in the world. Hong Qi looked at Yu Qianqiu with even more admiration. He had been taken away by Yu Qianqiu since he was a child. In his heart, besides being his master, Yu Qianqiu had more or less treated him like a father. Therefore, he would often show off in front of Yu Qianqiu and enjoy the pleasure of being beaten or kicked. It wasn't that he was a pervert, but he subconsciously hoped to find the kind of fatherly love that was missing. Now that his master was in charge of the demon domain and had the prestige of being the #1 expert in the world, he felt even more honored and proud to have such a master. "Remember, the reason why I brought you here is because the environment here is indispensable for cultivating the gold incantation. Once you've mastered it, you'll naturally understand the mysteries here. Sit down cross-legged and listen to your master's teachings," shouted Yu Qianqiu. Hong Qi immediately sat down excitedly and quickly calmed his mind and entered a state of concentration. Yu Qianqiu then explained the cultivation mysteries of the gold incantation in detail. After familiarizing himself with it, Hong Qi quickly entered a state of cultivation. After the teachings, Yu Qianqiu would occasionally return to the World Chamber of Commerce to take a look. The rest of his time was spent shuttling back and forth between the yellow soil plain and the Golden Plaza, checking on the two's cultivation progress. Speaking of which, the two of them were lucky. Back then, Yu Qianshou had put in a lot of effort in order to figure out these two sets of incantations. It was only by chance that he had the opportunity to successfully comprehend them. On the other hand, Zhang Peng and Hong Qi picked up a ready-made advantage without any danger. This was the benefit of being a disciple. A few days later, Zhang Peng was the first to successfully cultivate the earth incantation. He broke through the ground of the yellow soil plain and excitedly flew to Yu Qianshou in the air to bow. Yu Qianshou raised his hand and pressed it on Zhang Peng's shoulder. He injected his divine sense into Zhang Peng's dantian to check and found that Zhang Peng's cultivation had indeed directly soared from the tribulation stage to the soul formation stage. However, he immediately frowned. According to the signs of success in cultivating the earth incantation, a yellow crystal bead should have formed in his dantian. However, there was no bead in Zhang Peng's dantian. What was going on? Seeing his master frown, Zhang Peng hesitantly asked, "Master, is there a problem?" Yu Qianshou shook his head, indicating that there was no problem. He had been supervising their cultivation, so there shouldn't be any mistakes in the process. He wanted to see the results after Hong Qi mastered it. After bringing Zhang Peng back to the Utopia military camp, Yu Qianshou went to the Golden Square again. He saw that Hong Qi was looking at the hanging golden horn on the golden altar and pondering about something. Yu Qianshou then let out a cold snort. Hong Qi heard the sound and looked over. When he saw that it was him, he immediately rushed over dejectedly and bowed. "Master." Yu Qianshou placed his hand on him and injected his divine sense to check. He discovered that Hong Qi, who had also advanced to the soul formation stage, did not have a crystal bead in his dantian. He heaved a sigh of relief. He believed that it should be because he had cultivated a technique alone. Then, he brought Hong Qi back to the Utopia military camp. When the two of them met in the meeting room, they realized that each other's cultivation levels had increased tremendously. They could not help but click their tongues, lamenting how powerful the technique that their master had imparted to them was. Yu Qianshou looked at the two of them, who were in high spirits and could not contain their joy. He said calmly, "I've already imparted the metal art and earth art to the two of you. You'll have to figure out how to use them to fight the enemy. My master, who is your grandmaster, once told me that those who are good at using them are invincible. This sentence has always been my classic, and I'll tell you the same thing now. I hope that you can use the metal art and earth art well and unleash their greatest power." At the mention of his grandmaster, Zhang Peng only showed respect on his face and did not feel much. However, Hong Qi had been out there for so many years, so he knew how terrifying his grandmaster, Bai Changchun, was. He was a legend in the cultivation world. "We'll follow master's teachings." The two of them bowed respectfully. Yu Qianshou had many things to do at the moment, so he did not have the time to chat with the two of them. He took out a pill with a black halo and placed it on the table. A rich fragrance quickly filled the room. "Zhang Peng, find a reliable subordinate at the early stage of the tribulation transcendence to test the pill." "Great limit break pill?" Zhang Peng's eyes lit up. He had seen the pill recipe before, so he naturally knew that the Great Limit Break pill was an immortal pill that could increase one's cultivation level. It seemed that his master was prepared to use this. He immediately cupped his fists and said, "Yes," before quickly leaving. "Great Limit Break pill?" Hong Qi's eyes stared at the pill on the table. He had used the Limit Break pill before, so when he heard about the Great Limit Break pill, he could not help but mutter to himself. He did not know what his master was up to. Not long after, Zhang Peng returned with a burly subordinate. When the person saw that Yu Qianshou was actually here, he was slightly surprised and bowed. "Leader." Yu Qianshou nodded, then pointed at the pill on the table and smiled. "This is a new Great Limit Break pill that I refined. Its effect is equivalent to the Limit Break pill. I want to see how much it can increase your cultivation level." With that said, he placed a storage bag on the table, knocked on the table, and said, "Let's start on the table. There are enough spirit stones in the bag for you to use." Hearing this, Hong Qi's eyes lit up. It was indeed a treasure that could increase one's cultivation level. Yes. The person cupped his fists excitedly, then gently floated to the table and sat down cross-legged. He casually picked up a pill beside him, put it in his mouth, then closed his eyes and began to circulate the pill. Yu Qianqiu and the other two stared at him without blinking. Not long after, the person's body trembled, and his cheeks began to flush red. Then, his entire face turned red. Even his hands, which were placed on his knees, became bright red. Steam began to rise from his head. That person's eyes suddenly opened, only to see that his eyeballs had also turned blood red. He quickly took out 2 large handfuls of spirit stones from the storage bag on the table, and found that they were both shining purple top-grade spirit stones. His body couldn't help but tremble. Don't think too much, focus on your task. With a shout from Yu Qianqiu, the person immediately closed his eyes and began to frantically absorb the majestic spirit qi from the spirit stones in his hands. After a long time, not long after the redness on his body disappeared, the person's body shook. He looked at the 3 people who were staring at him with surprise and said, "I broke through to the middle stage of the tribulation passing stage. Let's see how many spirit stones you used." Yu Qianqiu said. He had to know the number of spirit stones used for each level of cultivation, because many people would soon take the restriction-breaking pill. He had to act according to his ability. Zhang Peng immediately went to count. The person had grabbed 2 handfuls of nearly 30 spirit stones, and 8 of them had exhausted their spirit qi. Zhang Peng reported, "I used a little more than 8 spirit stones, which is equivalent to 80,000 upper spirit stones. Take another pill and continue." Yu Qianqiu nodded at the person with a smile. That person immediately did as he was told and swallowed another great restriction-breaking pill. After that, the side effect of taking the pill was exactly the same as before. His whole body was like a cooked red prawn. Just as he grabbed 2 more spirit stones, his chest suddenly heaved up and down, and he couldn't help but spit out a mouthful of blood. What shocked them was that the blood he spat out was a little black, which was obviously not normal. The person was more or less frightened. Yu Qianqiu shouted again, "Don't worry, this is the poison that was expelled from your body. Continue." The person had to slowly close his eyes and continue to absorb spirit qi to increase his cultivation. Even if Yu Qianqiu didn't tell him, he still had to do it. At this moment, his body was like a big furnace, and he urgently needed to use spirit qi to cool it down. Otherwise, he would die from the heat. After a long time, when the color of his body returned to normal, his body shook again, and he suddenly opened his eyes. He couldn't help but stutter with joy, I broke through to the late stage of tribulation passing." This time, there was no need for Yu Qianqiu to say anything. His eyes were already staring at the pill on the table, and his chest was rising and falling a little quickly. One should know that if he could go one step further, his cultivation would enter the ranks of the legendary spirit-severing experts. This temptation was a little big, but he didn't dare to be greedy. He looked at the leader with a questioning gaze. Zhang Peng took the initiative to count the spirit stones, and after counting, he reported, 24 pieces of top-grade spirit stones were used, equivalent to 240,000 high-grade spirit stones. Yu Qianqiu nodded, walking to the table and took out another interspatial pouch, placing it in front of the person with a smile. Spirit severing and tribulation passing are 2 completely different concepts. I'm sure the amount of spirit stones used is not small. He took out a handful of shiny black spirit stones and waved it in front of the person, continuing, use divine grade spirit stones to continue. The group exchanged a look. This was the first time for Zhang Peng and Hong Qi to see divine grade spirit stones, so they couldn't help feeling shocked. Yes. The person complied and swallowed the great restriction-breaking pellet once more. The side effects that came with it caused him to spit out 2 mouthfuls of blood, and this time, the blood he spat out was much darker than before. However, the person didn't mind it. He believed that it was the poison that was expelled from his body. He grabbed 2 handfuls of divine-grade spirit stones and absorbed the spiritual energy in his body, rushing towards the spirit-severing realm. In fact, Yu Qianqiu knew that the black blood he spat out wasn't the poison that was expelled from his body, but a sign that the poison had worsened after taking the great restriction-breaking pellet. If the poison in his body accumulated to a certain extent, and he didn't take the marrow-cleansing pellet in time, it wouldn't take long for him to die. Fortunately, Yu Qianzhou had already prepared the marrow-cleansing pellet, but he wouldn't say anything now, lest it affect the effect of the pill test. Zhang Peng had come into contact with the contents of the pill, so he knew the inside story. However, he was born as a warlord, and when he commanded thousands of soldiers on the battlefield, he paid the smallest price in exchange for the greatest victory. Even if he failed the elixir trial, for the sake of the overall interests of Utopia's army, 1 or 2 deaths were nothing. Of course, this didn't mean that he didn't love his subordinates, but from his point of view, the sacrifice of 1 or 2 people in exchange for the success of all his subordinates was the greatest love. After a long period of time, the person suddenly sat there with his eyes closed, and his body was trembling non-stop. Instantly, the master and disciples, including Yu Qianzhou, were shocked, thinking that something had gone wrong. Yu Qianzhou was about to take a look, but who knew that the person would open his eyes and look at him excitedly, "Leader. I broke through to the early spirit severing realm." Yu Qianzhou was stunned, thinking that something had gone wrong with the person. He raised his hand speechlessly at Zhang Peng. Zhang Peng immediately counted the spirit stones in the person's hand, removing the one that had exhausted all of its spiritual energy, and said, "1 divine-grade spirit stone was used, worth 100 million high-grade spirit stones. Continue." Following Yu Qianzhou's order, the person took another great restriction-breaking pellet. That person took another restriction-breaking pill and spat out 3 mouthfuls of blood. Each mouthful was as black as ink. The great restriction-breaking pellet's effect was indeed very good, using only 3 divine-grade spirit stones to raise the person's cultivation to the mid-stage spirit-severing realm. This was the result of using medicinal pellets to convert spiritual energy, as well as a large amount of spirit stones. However, what worried Yu Qianzhou the most was that although the person sitting on the table was excited, he could see that the bones under his skin were dark green. Clearly, the poison was not light. Yu Qianzhou was afraid that this person wouldn't be able to take it if he continued. After all, this person was his subordinate. Hong Qi wasn't a fool either. Noticing the abnormality under the person's skin, it was obvious that this person was poisoned. Looking at the remaining great restriction-breaking pellets on the table, he sucked in a breath of cold air. Zhang Peng clearly saw through his master's worry. Gritting his teeth, he glared at the excited person and ordered, "Continue to break through to the late-stage spirit-severing realm." Yes. Unaware of his own condition, the person swallowed another great restriction-breaking pellet. What happened next was 4 mouthfuls of black blood that carried a faint stench. Fortunately, that person actually used 9 divine-grade spirit stones to really break through to the late-stage spirit-severing realm. However, the skin on his body was already dark purple, and there were even slight swelling. This was a sign that he was on the verge of dying. However, his gaze shifted back to the great restriction-breaking pellets on the table, and the greed in his nature was exposed. Breaking through to the late-stage spirit-severing realm, his heart yearned for a higher realm. Yu Qianzhou swept his sleeve, collecting all the remaining great restriction-breaking pellets on the table. He then took out a marrow-colored marrow-cleansing pellet and passed it to the person, shouting, "Quickly swallow it, dissolve the accumulated poison in your body." The person was stunned for a moment after receiving the marrow-cleansing pellet. Looking at his palm that was so dark that it was turning purple and swollen, he was dumbfounded. Yu Qianzhou's voice sounded again, "Quickly swallow it if you don't want to die." Chapter 925. Under the severe blow, that person hurriedly swallowed the marrow-cleansing pill in fear and quickly circulated the medicinal power. After a while, strands of black greasy substance continuously oozed out of his pores and accumulated on his body, finally wrapping his whole body with a disgusting sticky substance that was as black as pitch. The room instantly became stinky, but the 3 of them were not blown away by the stench. They held their breath and kept observing the changes in the man's body. After half a day, the man had been wrapped by the sticky substance that was discharged from his body, leaving only 2 nostrils and holes. His whole body was covered with a layer of black scabs. What worried the 3 of them the most was that the man's breathing had become very weak. Fortunately, the frequency of his heart, which was so chaotic that it was about to stop at any time, had gradually stabilized, which meant that he had passed the critical period. However, the three of them did not relax. No one could be sure what would happen until the end. When his weak breathing gradually became stronger, he moved slightly, and his body made a cracking sound. The black scabs that covered his whole body began to crack and peel off piece by piece. A face was the first to be revealed. He looked at Yu Qianzhou weakly and said in a weak voice, "Leader." Obviously, although the limit-breaking pill was extraordinary, using such a method to improve one's cultivation was too harmful to the body, not to mention taking 5 limit-breaking pills in a row. Yu Qianzhou's expression was a little dignified. No wonder few people in the big sects in the celestial realm used this kind of thing. The foundation of the body had been damaged, and their future achievements in cultivation were destined to be limited. When he first met Shui Mingqing, he heard him say that almost no one could improve their cultivation above the great celestial realm unless there was another remedial elixir. As for the remedial elixir, it was said that the sect master of Chaotian Palace had a kind of elixir called Mend Heaven Pill. However, it was said that the elixir needed to refine it was extremely difficult. Since the establishment of Chaotian Palace, only the sect master had refined it once. There was also a rumor that the sect master of Chaotian Palace was originally a nobody. Later, because of revenge, he took an elixir similar to the limit-breaking pill to forcibly improve his cultivation. In the end, after he got his revenge, his cultivation stagnated. However, those who could become the founder of a sect were all people with great perseverance. In order to repair the consequences of forcibly increasing his cultivation, he resolutely studied the art of alchemy, hoping that one day he would be able to remove the shackles on his body. Hard work pays off. He actually managed to research and refine the heaven-mending pill, breaking the shackles on his body in one go. At the same time, he had accumulated a wealth of experience in alchemy because he had concocted the heaven-mending pill. Thus, due to fate, he actually took a different path and walked a path that belonged to him. He established a sect with alchemy and founded the Skyward Palace of today. This is an immortal pill. Consume it and not only will it recover your strength, it will also help you raise your cultivation to the immortal realm. Yu Qianzhou took out the golden immortal ascension pill and added solemnly, the cultivation base of the immortal realm is divided into minor immortal, upper immortal, great immortal, and immortal emperor. Take this immortal ascension pill and it will help you break through to the early stage of minor immortal. An immortal pill. Hong Qi, who was at the side, was dumbfounded. He stared at the pill in his master's hand and could not help but sigh in his heart. His master was becoming more and more unfathomable. He actually had such a thing in his hands. Actually, when it came to immortal pills, only people like Yu Qianzhou who knew alchemy and had lived in the immortal realm knew that the so-called immortal pills in the immortal realm and the so-called spirit pills in the cultivation realm were the same thing. The only difference was the medicinal properties and the effects. Some of the immortal pills in the immortal realm were even worse than the spirit pills in the mortal realm. The so-called immortal herbs and spirit herbs were also the same thing. Many of them were common in both the immortal realm and the mortal realm. However, in the immortal realm, they were called immortal herbs, and in the mortal realm, they were called spirit herbs. For example, the adumbra flower that Yu Qianzhou regarded as a treasure was not only a top-notch immortal herb in the mortal realm, but also one of the top-notch immortal herbs in the immortal realm. When Yu Qianzhou had bought the treasure guide from Wan Ling, he had seen that the adumbra flower, one of the 9 top-notch immortal herbs in the immortal realm, was actually among them. Advance to the immortal realm. The man with the weak body cried out involuntarily. His trembling hand reached for the immortal pill in Yu Qianzhou's hand and put it into his mouth without hesitation. He ignored his body's weakness and impatiently circulated the medicinal power. Not long after, the three of them saw the man's weak and pale face turn red. His sunken eyes and cheekbones, which had been tossed around due to taking 5 great restriction-breaking pills, gradually became plump. A majestic aura slowly seeped out of his body and circulated around his body. It forced all the black scabs on his body to fall off, and in the blink of an eye, he was completely naked. On the surface, there didn't seem to be much movement, but the three of them could feel that his dantian was undergoing an earth-shattering change. The three of them wanted to use their divine senses to invade his dantian to investigate, but they were all forced out by the violent aura that was like a tornado. This time, the process of circulating the immortal ascension pills was a little long. He sat on the table for a full 3 days without moving at all. During this period, Yu Qianzhou would occasionally return to the World Chamber of Commerce to see if there was anything going on. In the end, the World Chamber of Commerce was deserted and almost no one came to visit. After asking around, it turned out that all the sects in the immortal realm were actively preparing to participate in the ranking conference. This concerned the honor of each sect, so it naturally attracted everyone's attention. Now, who would care about the trivial matters of the World Chamber of Commerce? Even Heartless Palace probably didn't have the leisure to care about him for now. In this way, Yu Qianzhou felt at ease. You guys worry about yourselves, and I can also do my own thing without worry. If there are any debts, we can settle them in the future. Let's not disturb each other for now. 3 days later, that disciple suddenly let out a painful groan, which immediately attracted the attention of the three master and disciples. They saw that the majestic aura that lingered outside his body had been completely absorbed into his body. His entire body swelled up like a ball, and cracks appeared on the surface of his body. Drops of blood seeped out, and it was obvious that his body had burst open. The three master and disciples looked at each other, not knowing why this was happening. This situation continued for close to half a day. That disciple's entire body was already dripping with blood. Fortunately, his body that was swollen like a ball was gradually drying up. Not long after, his entire body returned to normal. However, the dried bloodstains on his body looked a little horrifying. Oh! That disciple suddenly let out a long groan from his throat. It was the kind of groan that was comfortable to the bones, and it was the kind of groan that came after suffering. Then, the bones all over his body made explosive crackling sounds. His hands, which were clenched tightly around his abdomen, suddenly opened his arms, and a burst of golden mist burst out from his body. Immediately, the bloodstains on the surface of his body turned into dust and drifted away. After the golden mist circled around his body, he opened his mouth and sucked it all in. Zhang Peng and Hong Qi looked at each other. For some reason, Yu Qianzhou's eyes lit up. This was because he knew that after one's cultivation reached the immortal realm, the true essence in one's body would turn from white to gold after turning into immortal essence. This should be a success. Sure enough, that disciple's eyes suddenly opened, and a burst of light shot out. His entire body was full of vigor and spirit, and the joy on his face was indescribable. His gaze swept past Hong Qi and Zhang Peng, and found that the two were only at the early soul formation stage. His gaze landed on Yu Qianzhou, and he found that he still couldn't see through his leader's cultivation. He immediately landed lightly on the ground, and excitedly bowed, "Thank you for your help, leader. My cultivation has already broken through to the legendary immortal realm." He. Put on your clothes first. Yu Qianzhou pointed at his exposed body. The disciple looked down, and immediately found his storage bag awkwardly. He took out some clothes from inside and put them on. After he put on his clothes, Yu Qianzhou placed his hand on his body, and found that he had indeed advanced to the early small immortal realm. He immediately looked at him with a serious expression and said, "Although your cultivation has reached the immortal realm, your body has yet to be forged into an immortal body. If you act rashly, your body may not be able to withstand your current cultivation, and you may explode and die. But don't worry, I will find a way to help you forge an immortal body within 3 months. At that time, you will be a true immortal realm expert. Thank you for your help, leader." The disciple gratefully bowed deeply. Yu Qianzhou gave Zhang Peng a look. Zhang Peng understood and immediately led the disciple out. He couldn't help but tell the disciple to keep today's secret. "Master," Hong Qi said worriedly, "this person's cultivation suddenly advanced to the immortal realm. Will he cause any trouble?" "Humph." Yu Qianzhou snorted coldly, "He's just an early small immortal, he won't be able to cause any waves. I've even killed upper immortals before." Hong Qi was speechless when he heard that. He didn't know what level his master's cultivation had reached. When Zhang Peng returned, Yu Qianqiu took out an immortal ascension pill that was surrounded by a golden halo and looked at it. He held it lightly in his hand and asked, how many spirit stones did he use to advance from early tribulation passing to early small immortal? Zhang Peng thought for a moment and said, nearly 33 top-grade spirit stones and 13 divine-grade spirit stones. When converted to high-grade spirit stones, it's about 1,303,330,000. In other words, even if a person advanced from early foundation establishment to early small immortal, it wouldn't take more than 14 divine-grade spirit stones. There are close to 10,000 people in Utopia, so that's only 140,000 divine-grade spirit stones. More than 300 feudal lords. Yu Qianqiu muttered to himself, then asked, Hong Qi, you've been in the cultivation world for so long, and your forces are not small. How many cultivators are there in the cultivation world now? Hong Qi paused and pondered. The disciples of the lords of the various countries, the disciples of the various sects in China's cultivation world, and the individual cultivators scattered all over the cultivation world, as well as our own people, I'm afraid there are close to 1 million cultivators. 1 million cultivators. 14 divine-grade spirit stones for each person, that's only about 10 million. Not a lot, not a lot, not a lot at all. However, I can't care about them right now. Yu Qianqiu calculated for a moment, then chuckled sinisterly. No one knew what he was thinking. He looked at the immortal ascension pill in his hand, then took out 3 jade archives and passed them to Zhang Peng, saying, these are the pill formulas for the Great Restriction Breaking Pill, Marrow Cleansing Pill, and Immortal Ascension Pill. Give him the Great Restriction Breaking Pills pill formula first and ask him to refine 100,000 Great Restriction Breaking Pills. Once he's done, give him the Marrow Cleansing Pills pill formula, 20,000 pills. Finally, give him the Immortal Ascension Pills pill formula, 20,000 pills. This. Zhang Peng was a little troubled. Master, you should look for Chief Qin yourself. I don't have the right to order him around. I have my reasons for asking you to do that. I want them to understand my attitude, and I hope that we won't be too distant from each other. Yu Qianqiu sneered. Go ahead and pass on the message. Whether they carry it out or not is up to them. If all these pills are refined, the first thing you need to do is to raise your army's cultivation. You've seen the process of refining the pills, there's no need for me to teach you. There are 100 million divine-grade spirit stones inside, enough for everyone. Huang Xiaolong threw a storage pouch to Zhang Peng. Chapter 926. Yes. Zhang Peng accepted the order and put away the things. Hong Qi, who was at the side, looked at the immortal ascension pill in his master's hand with envy. He smiled apologetically and said, Master, don't let the goodies flow to outsiders. When will we be able to raise our cultivation again? Yu Qianqiu glanced at him. He also wanted everyone's cultivation to reach the heavens in a single step, but it was easy to forcibly increase cultivation, but it was troublesome to forge an immortal body. It was fine if there were only a few people, but if there were too many, it would be troublesome. It would definitely attract the attention of the Immortal Palace. Moreover, the Immortal Palace controlled the 72 worlds' immortal ascension passages. It would be difficult to avoid them. What's the hurry? Yu Qianqiu said indifferently. There is something you need to pay attention to when you get out. Use the connections of Hong Gang and Qing Gang to find out who can make pills in the entire cultivation world. And those cultivators scattered around the cultivation world, as long as they can make pills, record their whereabouts. When I need them, you must make sure that you can find them at any time. Ah. Hong Qi was stunned. He scratched his face in confusion. Master, do you want them to help you make pills? Just do as I say. Yu Qianqiu waved his hand and sent him back to Hong Gang. He then opened his palm and looked at the immortal ascension pill in his hand. He muttered to himself, there are many big sects in the immortal world. Each of them is strong and well-trained. Although I am not as good as them, I have more people. I have millions of cultivators in the human world. Which sect in the immortal world dares to say that they have more people than me? Who says that they can't compete with you? Now that all the spirit-severing cultivators in the cultivation world were under his command, the entire human world was his territory. There was no other reason why he asked Hong Chi to count the number of people who could make pills in the cultivation world. Because although the number of people in the cultivation world was huge, to bring them to the immortal world to join in the fun, their cultivation was too low. Therefore, he needed a lot of limit-breaking pills and marrow-cleansing pills. But how many people would they need for 1,000,000? Just one tribulation-passing stage cultivator required 5 restriction-breaking pills, 1 marrow-cleansing pill, and 1 immortal ascension pill. In the cultivation world, there were countless foundation establishment and nascent soul cultivators. He needed at least 8 million restriction-breaking pills, and at least 1 million marrow-cleansing pills and immortal ascension pills. With such a large number of pills, if Chen Feng and the others were to refine them, it would probably take several years even if they worked day and night. Therefore, he needed all the alchemy cultivators in the entire cultivation world to work for him. With his current power in the cultivation world, this was not a problem at all. The only thing that worried him the most was how he should find a way to help these people smoothly obtain their immortal physiques. Zhang Peng. Tell your master's wife to stop doing other things and plant the immortal herbs used to refine these 3 immortal pills. The planting ratio of Great Restriction Breaking Pill, Marrow Cleansing Pill and Immortal Ascension Pill is 8-to-1, Yu Qianzhou said lightly. Plant them without limit? Zhang Peng was shocked. He did not know why his master wanted such a large number. After a pause, he still accepted the order and said, yes. When he raised his head again, his master was no longer in front of him. In a remote area of Utopia, on a large snowy mountain where few people went, Yu Qianzhou looked at the purple chaos not far away. It was vast and mighty, connecting the heavens and the earth. As his cultivation level increased, the territory of Utopia also became wider. Mountains and rivers appeared one after another, and he did not expect that even the snowy mountain would appear. As long as my cultivation level can continue to increase, it seems that this place will become an independent world sooner or later. I just don't know how big it will be in the end. Yu Qianzhou looked at the purple chaos in the distance and muttered to himself. He opened his palm, and the fragrant immortal ascension pill was swallowed by him without hesitation. Then, he sat down cross-legged and closed his eyes to circulate the medicinal power. Under the corrosion of the immortal ascension pill in his stomach, some golden liquid gradually appeared on its surface. Traces of energy started to seep out and spread to his limbs and bones. As the liquid increased, the energy started to be released in waves, and it became more and more intense as it surged into his meridians. At first, this energy could still flow smoothly under the control of Yu Qianzhou's quintessential essence. However, as the speed at which the immortal ascension pill melted increased, the released energy started to flood his meridians like raging waves. It was violent and violent, causing Yu Qianzhou's heart to palpitate. The golden fog-like energy increased until it filled all the meridians in his limbs and bones. It even surged directly into his dantian. Increase. 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 As the energy overloaded his body, Yu Qianzhou felt swollen. His entire body was swollen and painful, and his skin felt like it was about to split open. At that moment, he was no longer in the mood to control the energy in his body. He raised his cultivation level to the limit and tried his best to protect his swollen body. Damn it. It was too painful. If he had known this would happen, he wouldn't have played with it. If this went on, he would definitely explode. Yu Qianzhou was immersed in endless pain and suffering. This feeling was too uncomfortable. Once it started, there was no way to get rid of it. He couldn't avoid it even if he wanted to. He felt like his body was about to explode, and he really couldn't hold on any longer. He didn't know that his current appearance was the same as the subordinate he had seen before. His entire body was covered with cracks, and blood had already dyed his entire body. His entire body was swollen like a ball, and he didn't look like a human anymore. Just as he was about to give up, the 10 small people in his dantian, who were sitting cross-legged with their eyes closed, were finally forced open by the pressure of the golden fog and entered his body. The 10 small people trembled and opened their eyes at the same time. Their clear eyes looked at each other, and they seemed to know that their original bodies were in danger. So, they opened their mouths and noses and breathed in the quintessential essence mixed with the golden fog. They began to speed up the refinement process. The golden fog was like a medicine that could assimilate the quintessential essence. The 10 small people breathed in the golden white fog, but what they breathed out was a wisp of golden light. They breathed in big mouthfuls, but what they breathed out was only a thin wisp. As the 10 small people worked hard to refine the golden fog, Yu Qianqiu, who felt like he couldn't hold on any longer, finally persevered. Moreover, as time passed, he felt that his skin, which was about to burst open, was showing signs of shrinking. In fact, he was like a balloon that had been inflated and was gradually shrinking, but the speed was a little slow. After an unknown amount of time, when Yu Qianqiu finally heaved a sigh of relief and began to examine his body with his divine sense, he immediately discovered the actions of the 10 small people in his body. The wisps of golden light that they breathed out seemed to have a mind of their own. As soon as they were spat out, they swam out of his dantian like living fish and began to wander around his meridians, as if they were observing this new world. Immortal essence. Yu Qianqiu's body shook. With a glance, he could guess that the golden wisps were immortal essence. He couldn't help but be overjoyed. There was finally hope for his cultivation to reach the immortal realm. Subconsciously, he wanted to control them, but they were too small and not very obedient. They were as slippery as loaches, very hard to control. The 10 small people continuously breathed in and out, and as time passed, the number of golden wisps increased, scurrying around his meridians. Once they met, they would happily fuse together. When they formed a small golden cloud, they could no longer escape Yu Qianqiu's control. Yu Qianqiu controlled the golden cloud to sweep through all the meridians in his body, taking in stray strands and merging them into a large golden cloud. After that, he began to clear and expel the remaining true essence and golden mist from his body into his dantian for the 10 small people to absorb and refine. When the last golden and white mist was absorbed, refined and spat out, the 10 small people seemed to have gained a great understanding. Each of them solemnly closed their eyes, and the circle formed by the 10 people began to spin faster and faster. In the end, it was so fast that even Yu Qianqiu himself couldn't see it clearly. A huge suction force began to emerge from his dantian, sucking all the golden immortal essence in Yu Qianqiu's body into his dantian, stirring up a golden hurricane in his dantian. Even if Yu Qianqiu wanted to use his divine sense to explore it, it would be difficult. Suddenly, a huge momentum exploded in his dantian like a nuclear weapon. Yu Qianqiu's body shook, and from the inside out, a golden mist suddenly burst out of his body, washing away all the blood scabs on his body. How could Yu Qianqiu allow the celestial core power that he had painstakingly refined to dissipate? He immediately extended his divine sense outwards and opened his mouth and nose. Like a whale drawing water, he sucked in the golden mist that lingered around his body. The golden cloud, which was originally intertwined with steel wires, was blown to pieces. After it was reorganized, it flowed back into Yu Qianqiu's body. His body, which was covered with bruises and bruises, was like a good rain after a long drought. It felt cool and refreshing to his limbs and bones. Oh! Yu Qianqiu let out an incomparably comfortable moan. He found that the effects of the explosion were quite good. The immortal elemental energy didn't have its own consciousness like before. At this moment, his consciousness was the immortal elemental energy's consciousness. It was completely under his control. When he controlled the immortal essence to nourish his meridians and circulate it to his dantian, Yu Qianqiu realized that the 10 little people in his dantian had become 9. After the explosion, the 7 souls had merged with his life soul. The 7 souls had begun to return to his life soul, which meant that his cultivation had entered another level, reaching the early stage of minor immortal. Yu Qianqiu's eyes widened, and he suddenly stood up with his arms facing the sky. He laughed out loud excitedly. However, before he could laugh for a while, his laughter stopped abruptly. He saw that the purple chaos not far from the Great Snow Mountain had disappeared without a trace. Looking from the Great Snow Mountain, the foot of the mountain where the snow had melted was connected to a large area of wilderness. As he looked further, he saw a beach. At the edge of the beach, white waves surged, crashing against the shore, and a vast ocean surged. The ocean actually appeared. Yu Qianqiu did not expect to see such a scene the moment he opened his eyes. He immediately let out a long howl toward the sky in excitement, echoing the surging ocean in the distance. Chapter 927. The blazing sun, the blue sky, the snowy mountains, the sea. Yu Qianqiu stood at the top of the snowy mountain. He was excited, but he couldn't help but feel a little proud. This was his world, a world that completely belonged to him. He stood on the mountain and looked at the sky and the ground for a long time. After a long time, he slowly withdrew his thoughts. Suddenly, his gaze froze. He found that he was the same as his previous subordinate. He was completely naked on the mountain. Needless to say, this was the result of his cultivation breaking through to the early stage of small immortal. Yu Qianqiu looked around guiltily. Fortunately, there was no one else here. He couldn't help but heave a sigh of relief. He then stretched out his palm. A water dragon surged out from his palm, winding from top to bottom. It wrapped around his body and swam quickly. The increase in his cultivation made it easier for him to control the water flow. His whole body was sparkling. In his excitement, he waved his arm and pointed to the sky. The water dragon wrapped around him wriggled into the sky and danced in the air above the snowy mountain. The water dragon was transparent, but its horns were distinct and lifelike. Its appearance was exactly the same as the majestic red dragon that Yu Qianqiu had seen under the blue fire. After controlling it to his heart's content, he still couldn't vent his passion. He waved his arm again and a yellow earth dragon flew out from his arm. It flew into the sky and played with the water dragon. Yu Qianqiu was pleasantly surprised to find that it was easy to control the earth and water magic at the same time. It was not difficult at all. Thus, he waved his arm and pointed it at the sky again, and a dazzling golden dragon emerged from his arm and flew into the sky, joining the water and earth dragons in their chase. Immediately, a spectacle of 3 dragons dancing together appeared in the sky above the snow-capped mountain. Go! Yu Qianqiu looked up at the sky and shouted. A green fireball shot out from his palm and bounced into the sky. 3 vivid dragons of different colors immediately chased after the green fireball. The 3 dragons playing with fire pearl, they fought each other. This was the first time he used 4 magic arts at the same time since he started cultivating the water, fire, metal, and earth magic arts. He had tried it in the past, but he could only control 2 magic arts at the same time. Unexpectedly, after his cultivation base had reached the early stage minor immortal stage, it would be so easy for him to control 4 magic arts at the same time. Since that's the case, let's go again. Go! Yu Qianqiu excitedly waved his right hand again and slapped the air. A black fireball shot into the sky. The water dragon of the 3 dragons playing with a pearl immediately shook its head and wagged its tail as it chased after it. As soon as the black flame appeared, Yu Qianqiu immediately felt that it was difficult to control it. After all, he was controlling 4 types of magic arts at the same time. However, his left hand still shot out a purple fireball. However, the moment the purple flames rose into the sky, the entire utopia seemed to tremble slightly. There seemed to be a faint purple light flashing in the sky. Although it only appeared for the blink of an eye, Yu Qianqiu saw it clearly. He could not help but look at the purple fireball that was burning in the sky. He had a strange feeling in his heart. This ball of purple flame seemed to be a fire seed, and when it appeared, it seemed to have ignited something in utopia. The sound of waves crashing against the shore suddenly rang out. Yu Qianqiu looked over and saw that the sea in the distance had suddenly surged with raging waves. It looked abnormally uneasy. In the sky above the sea, the sky gradually darkened, and dark clouds brewed. Moreover, the clouds seemed to be getting thicker and thicker. After a while, one could hear the faint sound of thunder coming from within. Could it be? Yu Qianqiu's gaze stopped on the purple flame in the sky again. He was almost connected to the entire utopia, so he naturally sensed that something abnormal was happening in Utopia. He could clearly sense that the abnormal activity in Utopia had something to do with the purple flames that he had released. Purple flames are the energy that maintains the operation of a world. Almost every world has it. Yu Qianzhou's eyes flickered as he muttered softly. Then, he waved his arms and summoned the 3 types of flames in the sky. The 3 wyverns also flew over and circled around him. In the blink of an eye, they disappeared into his body. After the purple flames disappeared, the rumbling and rolling dark clouds above the sea immediately lost their momentum and slowly shrank back to their original positions. From this, Yu Qianzhou was even more certain of his guess. His shoulders trembled slightly, and a ball of purple flames suddenly burst out from his body, enveloping his entire body. The wind could not disperse it. In an instant, the sound of thunder rang out again. Yu Qianzhou stared at the sea with a burning gaze. The dark clouds that had just retreated immediately churned again. They spewed out like ink, and the sound of thunder rumbled as they pushed forward. Not long after, they arrived above his head. In an instant, the wind and clouds surged, and the weather changed. The snow on the mountain peak was blown everywhere, and bolts of lightning were faintly visible in the dark clouds. I see. The energy that maintains the operation of a world. If I can control it well, I believe the might of the world can be used by me. A faint smile appeared on Yu Qianzhou's face. He finally felt the connection between the dark clouds and the purple flames. Then, he slowly closed his eyes and silently felt the subtle changes between the purple flames and the dark clouds above his head. Just like that, he stood there with his eyes closed for an entire day. Lightning flashed across the dark clouds above his head, and his body was covered in purple flames. When he suddenly opened his eyes, he stretched out a finger and brazenly pointed at a ridge halfway up the mountain. In that instant, there was a loud bang in the air, and a bolt of lightning rapidly struck down from the dark clouds, directly hitting the ridge. Boom! Earth and rocks exploded, and the ridge that was covered in pure white snow disappeared in the blink of an eye. Only a large piece of pitch-black land was left, and the slightly burnt green smoke was swept away by the mountain wind. The speed of lightning is close to teleportation. If it is used to attack, heh. I didn't think the purple flames could be used in this way. As expected, if you use it well, you will be invincible under the heavens. Yu Qianzhou couldn't help but laugh wildly. He had never thought that the purple flames could be used in this way. Again. A fierce look appeared on Yu Qianzhou's face. He stretched out both his palms, and the purple flames that covered his body quickly flowed into his palms, forming a deep purple fireball in each of his palms. He clenched his 5 fingers, and with a yeah sound, he suddenly opened his arms. Rumble. The dark clouds in the sky began to churn rapidly, and the wind in the mountain also began to howl mournfully. The wind swirled and danced in the air, gradually condensing into numerous wind blades that were almost tangible. They densely covered the entire sky, and danced chaotically like flying darts with xiao sounds. At this moment, Yu Qianzhou's gaze suddenly shot towards another ridge, and in an instant, the densely packed wind blades shot out in a frenzy. Bang, bang, bang. A series of explosions rang out incessantly. After a short while, the remaining wind blades collapsed and disintegrated, turning into a gale that swept away the dense dust and smoke. The mountain ridge that was more than 10 meters high suddenly disappeared. It had been disintegrated by the wind blades, leaving only densely packed deep marks where it had been. There's more. Yu Qianzhou clenched both his fists, and following his explosive shout, rumble, the thick dark clouds above his head immediately responded violently. The electric snakes shuttling through the clouds quickly intertwined into a thunderbolt, and with a loud bang, another ridge was blasted into pieces. Soon after, a second, a third, a fourth. For a moment, thunder and lightning intertwined, and the thunderbolts were as dense as a curtain of rain, winding and dazzling. The sky and earth were flashing, and it was almost impossible to see the surrounding scenery clearly. Countless thunderbolts crazily struck the surroundings of the snowy mountain, and the sky and earth changed color. The explosions were deafening, and in the blink of an eye, mountain ridges were razed to the ground. Only when the snowy mountain under his feet began to sway, did Yu Qianqiu, who was standing alone in the crisscrossing light and shadow, put down his arms, and the countless thunderbolts immediately disappeared. Yu Qianqiu looked around, and only then did he realize that within a few miles, with the main peak as the center, all the small mountains had been destroyed by the thunderbolts, and the ground was full of potholes caused by the thunderbolts. The main peak under his feet had become a lonely peak that stood tall and straight, but it was also filled with cracks of different width, and could collapse at any time. The thunderbolts that filled the sky left behind a reverberating sound, and the thunderbolts in the dark clouds above his head also disappeared. In an instant, the entire world returned to silence. The purple flame gradually disappeared from his palm, and Yu Qianqiu looked around and sneered, "Wind, fire, thunder, and lightning, the power of heaven and earth, all for my use, hee hee. If there's a chance, I'll find some blind fools to test their power." Ugh! His whole body felt like it was being torn apart, and he let out a cold breath. When he looked down, he was immediately shocked. He saw that the surface of his skin had burst open, and blood was flowing out, and he could see the fresh flesh and blood vessels under his skin. In short, his whole body had been severely damaged. Oh no! I've overdone it. Yu Qianqiu smiled bitterly. When he felt the pain earlier, he thought he could endure it, but he didn't expect to be injured to this extent. Obviously, because his body wasn't tough enough, he used his immortal-level cultivation to forcibly exert great power, and as a result, his body was damaged. It was good that his body didn't explode. I'll recover first, then I'll go back to the immortal world and use the immortal passage to forge an immortal body. Yu Qianqiu sighed helplessly, and sat down cross-legged. He looked up at the dark clouds in the sky, and just as he was about to make them disappear, he suddenly froze, and looked at the dark clouds in the sky in a daze. He suddenly felt that the scene of summoning the lightning was somewhat familiar, as if he had seen it somewhere before. In a flash, he recalled the process of summoning lightning in the Eastern Holy Land to refine his body and forge an immortal body. Yu Qianqiu, who came back to his senses, looked at his body that was covered with cuts and bruises. After a moment of hesitation, a ruthless expression flashed across his face, and he gritted his teeth. He spread out his palms, and the two purple flames were pinched in his palms again. Rumble. The dark clouds in the sky rolled again, and thunder rumbled. Electric snakes also shuttled back and forth. Suddenly, a small electric snake flashed and struck Yu Qianqiu's body. On the spot, his hair exploded, and his whole body was charred black. He fell to the ground, and cursed, "Motherf asterisk cur." He shook his head, and sat up again. Chapter 928. Yu Qianqiu was speechless as he looked at the dark clouds filled with electric snakes. He had been so stupid just now and let the lightning strike him without any resistance. Although he was a little afraid and only got a small bolt of lightning to strike him, it was still enough to make him feel like he had fainted. Now that he thought about it, he realized that he was really stupid. How can I use the power of lightning to forge an immortal body? Yu Qianqiu frowned and muttered to himself. He recalled the process of Bai Changchun forging an immortal body in the Eastern Holy Land. The scene of the golden arcs communicating with the power of heaven and earth had shocked him an immortal crocodile. It was still fresh in his memory. After pondering for a while, Yu Qianqiu could not help but shake his head and smile bitterly. He admitted that he could not figure out Bai Changchun's mysterious method. Even if he could, it would certainly not be something that could be done in a short time. After thinking about it, he gave up on imitating it. Damn it. I'll naturally get the feeling after a few more strikes. Yu Qianqiu looked at the dark clouds in the sky and made up his mind. However, he would not leave his defenses like last time. The celestial essence in his body quickly circulated to cover his whole body for defense. Rumble. An electric snake shot over and hit Yu Qianqiu directly. He felt his whole body go numb, and his mind recovered from the temporary blankness. But this time, it was obviously better than last time. In addition, he could control the power of the lightning, so he did not get struck and curse again. After getting used to it once or twice, Yu Qianqiu immediately became bolder. Small thunderbolts were continuously injected into his body, and the subtle changes that occurred in his body were immediately captured by him. After his cultivation reached the immortal realm, the speed at which celestial essence repaired his damaged body was obviously much faster than that of spiritual essence. The most amazing thing was that the combination of the lightning and celestial essence seemed to produce a chemical effect. The damaged body that was repaired was obviously many times tougher than the original body, so that's how it is. It's not complicated at all. I've been worried for nothing. Understanding the mystery behind it, a thin bolt of lightning immediately struck down from the dark clouds. The strange thing was that this thunderbolt was like a rope thrown out from the dark clouds. One end of it was tied to Yu Qianqiu, who was on the mountain peak, and the other end was tied to the dark clouds in the sky. The dazzling greenish-white thunderbolt rope kept twisting in the sky, connecting the sky and the earth. The buzzing sound of electric currents reverberated throughout the mountain peak. Streaks of electric currents formed a green halo that wrapped around Yu Qianqiu's body like a hoop. The expression on Yu Qianqiu's face was twisted. He gritted his teeth to stay awake and accept the tempering of the lightning. He was changing his body bit by bit. He didn't dare to rush the 5-blow thunderstruck. Several days later, the electric rope binding him disappeared and the dark clouds in the sky began to disperse. When the sky was clear again, Yu Qianqiu finally opened his eyes. A bright light flashed in his eyes. He, who was sitting cross-legged on the mountain peak, suddenly leaped up, opened his arms, and let out a long howl towards the sky. After venting the excitement in his heart, Yu Qianqiu couldn't help but shake his head and smile bitterly when he recalled the process of Bai Changchun's body tempering. That was like being struck by a sky full of angry lightning. Perhaps only that perverted old man would dare to do that. If he was randomly struck by that kind of angry lightning, he definitely wouldn't be able to withstand it. From this, it could be seen how big the difference in ability was between the two of them. In the basement of the World Commerce Association, Yu Qianqiu was lying naked in the bath. After soaking for a while, he got up and grabbed a set of clothes to wear. Then, he walked unsteadily to the hall on the first floor. In the hall, a few lords of the soul formation stage were chatting in 2s and 3s. Most of the others were hiding in their rooms to cultivate. The door outside was deserted. At least, Yu Qianqiu didn't see a single guest. When the 5 or 6 people in the hall saw him suddenly appear, they all saluted and said, "Sect Master." Yu Qianqiu nodded and asked knowingly, "How's business?" Someone didn't know whether to laugh or cry and replied, "It's still the same." Everyone's in good spirits. You guys continue. After Yu Qianqiu waved his hand to dismiss everyone, he was about to go upstairs when he saw Yu Nantian, who was wearing a white fur coat and had an elegant temperament, slowly walk in. When Yu Nantian saw Yu Qianqiu in the hall, he was slightly startled. However, he was used to Yu Qianqiu's unpredictability, so he immediately walked over and called out, "Sect Master. Is there any news from outside recently?" Yu Qianqiu asked. "There is some, but it's not good news," Yu Nantian said helplessly. Yu Qianqiu raised his eyebrows and said, "Tell me about it." "Sect Master, please restrain your grief." Yu Nantian sighed and cupped his hands. "Restrain my grief?" Yu Qianqiu was startled and didn't understand. He asked suspiciously, "What do you mean? Did something happen to someone here?" "It's not here." Yu Nantian waved his hand and explained, "Sect Master, you don't know this. It's said that your good friend Shui Mingqing from Chaotian Palace was killed in Chaotian Palace some time ago. The murderer hasn't been found yet." Yu Qianqiu was startled again. "I thought it was something serious. It turned out to be him. I killed Shui Mingqing. Why should I restrain my grief?" However, he still asked with grief and indignation on his face, "Is the news true?" "It should be true. It spread all over the hallucinatory immortal city. Chaotian Palace didn't come out to refute the rumor." "It must be true," Yu Nantian said. I'll go to Chaotian Palace's branch to verify it later." Yu Qianqiu suppressed the grief and asked, "You said there's bad news. What is it?" "That." Yunnan Tian was a little embarrassed. He observed Yu Qianqiu's expression and said, "The great master of Passionless Palace, Zhang Yinxin, has come to Chaotian Immortal City's branch. It's said that he's here to keep an eye on you. As soon as you leave Chaotian Immortal City, he left out the unlucky words." Yu Qianqiu wasn't a fool. He knew what the latter part was. He sneered, "What's there to hide? He just wants to kill me. If he has the ability, just do it." Then he asked, "What about the other news? Recently, everyone has been talking about the ranking meeting. Most of the sects are preparing for it. The other news is just gossip. It's messy and not worth mentioning," Yunnan Tian said. "Okay, you can go about your business." Yu Qianqiu nodded to show that he got it. Then he slowly walked upstairs. He planned to check on Bai Suzhen first and then go to Chaotian Palace's branch to express his condolences for Shui Mingqing's death. When he reached the 22nd floor, Yu Qianqiu walked lightly to Wei Chuanxiu, who was sitting cross-legged at the door with his eyes closed. He peeped through the crack of the door, only to see white streamers moving inside. He couldn't see the situation inside at all. "Where have you been these days?" Wei Chuanxiu opened his eyes slowly and asked. Yu Qianqiu didn't answer his question. He pouted his mouth at the room and said, "Is she all right?" Wei Chuanxiu also didn't answer his question. He pouted his mouth at the room diagonally opposite and said, "Your subordinate one-armed old ghost kept asking for you. He disturbed the tranquility here. I asked him to face the wall and think about it." "One-armed old ghost? Li Duxing? Why is he looking for me?" Yu Qianqiu murmured. He turned around and opened the door diagonally opposite. He saw Li Duxing standing stiffly facing the wall. He didn't move even when he came in. "What's the matter?" Yu Qianqiu walked to him and asked. However, Li Duxing still didn't move. Yu Qianqiu then realized that Li Duxing must have been restrained by Wei Chuanxiu. Otherwise, with Li Duxing's character, how could he face the wall and think about it obediently? Just when he was about to ask Wei Chuanxiu to release Li Duxing's inhibition, a ray of light outside the door shot into Li Duxing's body. Li Duxing gave a slight muffled hum, then moved his body a little and slowly turned around. Obviously, he had been trapped for a long time. "I haven't seen Miss for a long time. What did you do to her?" Li Duxing stared at him and asked with his eyes sparkling. Yu Qianqiu knew that the Miss he was talking about was Lu Yanqing. This guy was ranked behind Wen Lanfeng. He was Lu Yanqing's second patron saint, but he didn't stick to Lu Yanqing as much as Wen Lanfeng. Yu Qianqiu sighed, "It's really hard to explain in a short time. Your Mrs. Brain is not normal." He immediately told him how he went to the wedding banquet with Lu Yanqing after Wen Lanfeng left, and how Lu Yanqing was stimulated by Wen Lanfeng's departure and refused to come back, so she stayed in the Elysium fairyland. Li Duxing was speechless after listening. Based on his understanding of Lu Yanqing, he knew that it was very likely that she would do such a thing. After a pause, he frowned and said to himself with a gloomy expression, "When Lanfeng is gone, don't worry. Your Miss has a good relationship with Wu Xiong's wife. She should be fine. Besides, I'm trying to get her back. By the way, come with me." Yu Qianqiu beckoned him and went out. "Bat King Wei, have you given the thing I asked you to give to the great Ming Luan?" Yu Qianqiu squatted beside Wei Chuanxiu and asked, with Li Duxing standing behind him. Li Duxing looked at Wei Chuanxiu with mixed feelings. Thinking of the scene where he was subdued by Wei Chuanxiu, it was a big blow to him. Wei Chuanxiu first glanced at Li Duxing, then replied, "I've asked the great Ming Luan to deliver the thing, but the girl has left Wu Xiong's mansion. You two don't need to worry. The girl is fine. I heard that because the girl played and sang well, Immortal Ji Wu took a fancy to her. Immortal Emperor Jin Tai personally asked Wu Xiong to send the girl to Immortal Ji Wu's residence." Wei Chuanxiu took out a jade archive and handed it to Yu Qianqiu, saying, "Before the thing was delivered to the girl, the great Ming Luan brought it back and returned it to you. He asked me to tell you that it's not convenient for him to meet immortal Ji Wu at will. And since it's the immortal emperor who asked for the girl, there's no need to see her again. Unless the immortal emperor agrees, no one dares to let the girl leave the Elysium fairyland. Chapter 929. As soon as the Jade Archive fell into Yu Qianzhou's hand, Li Duxing snatched it and quickly injected his divine sense into it. But after reading it, he immediately looked at Yu Qianzhou with disdain and threw it back to Yu Qianzhou. It could be said that he had a deeper understanding of Yu Qianzhou's character. The contents of the Jade Archive were the words that Yu Qianzhou made up to trick Lu Yanqing to come back. The general meaning was that when Lan Feng came back with serious injuries and wanted to see Lu Yanqing again before he died. Li Duxing had to admit that such words really hit Lu Yanqing's soft spot. Based on Lu Yanqing's character, as long as she saw the contents of the Jade Archive, she would risk her life to come back. Then again, this also convinced Li Duxing that Yu Qianzhou did not lie to him. Lu Yanqing did not come back voluntarily. Wei Chuanxiu, who was sitting cross-legged, glanced at Yu Qianzhou and chuckled coldly. His character wasn't that great either, and he couldn't hold back for a moment. He had long since seen the contents inside. Yu Qianzhou looked at the two of them, who were seated on one side and standing on the other, and laughed awkwardly. He had crushed the Jade Archive in his hand. It could be considered as a last-ditch effort to erase the evidence. Li Duxing, if there's nothing else, go back first. Yu Qianzhou laughed as if nothing had happened. Miss is in Paradise Wonderland. Li Duxing frowned and muttered. Yu Qianzhou was startled. He stared at him with a serious face and warned, Li Duxing, you'd better not act recklessly. Paradise Wonderland is not a place you can trespass. The top masters of the immortal world gather there. With your current cultivation, going there is no different from seeking death. Besides, even if you don't think for yourself, you have to think for the World Chamber of Commerce. Don't mess with the immortal palace and bring trouble to everyone. Don't worry, I will get Lu Yanqing back when I have the chance. I know what I'm capable of. Li Duxing shook his head to show that he knew what to do. After hesitating for a while, he frowned and asked, You, Headmaster, do you know where Wen Lanfeng went for cultivation? He didn't say that. Before he left, he only said that he had lost the ability to protect Lu Yanqing. He hoped to find back the ability to protect her. Yu Qianzhou paused for a moment, then sighed. I think he wants to find back his dignity even more. At the very least, he wanted to regain his dignity in front of Lu Yanqing. A man who was trapped by love. Why do you have to do this? Li Duxing fell into silence. After a long time, a resolute look flashed on his face. He slowly raised his head to look at Yu Qianzhou and said in cadence, My life was saved by Mississippi. Although Miss doesn't care about it, I once swore to Miss that as long as Miss needs me, I will do anything for you. A man should never go back on his words, but the situation here really makes me blush with shame. If Miss really needs me one day, I'm afraid I'll be powerless. What Wen Lanfeng did was right. What do you mean? Yu Qianzhou's pupils suddenly shrank. He had already guessed what he wanted to do. Li Duxing's eyes suddenly burst out a vigorous fighting spirit. He stared at Yu Qianzhou's eyes and said word by word, Among the people I have met in my life, the one I admire the most is your master. Although I almost died in his hands, I admit my defeat. My greatest wish in this life is to have the qualifications to fight with him again. I believe that he is still alive, and perhaps I will have the chance to see him again. If I can fight with him again, I will die without regrets. Yu Qianzhou looked at him speechlessly. He found that there were always people who overestimated themselves in this world. They were not opponents of the same level at that time, and now the gap between them was like heaven and earth. If the old guy was still alive, you would die without regret if you provoked him again. There would not always be someone to save your life at the critical moment. Just say it. What do you want to say? Yu Qianzhou squinted his eyes and moved his fingers behind his back. Li Duxing immediately sensed a faint murderous intent from Yu Qianzhou, but he still said without fear, When Lan Fengshan can work hard, but Li Duxing, won't stop here. Yu Qianqiu's eyes flashed with fierceness. He said, I know what you mean. You also want to learn from Wen Lanfeng and go out to practice alone. But you have to know that the wind and rain outside are treacherous. There's something I might as well tell you in advance. Before long, I'll be able to let everyone in the World Chamber of Commerce step into the immortal realm. This is a rare opportunity, don't miss it. There is a plum garden in the ghost village. In the cold winter, thousands of trees wither, but only the fragrance of plum blossoms comes from the bitter cold. Only by climbing the perilous peak can you see the wonderful scenery that others can't. People are born in hardships and die in peace. Li Duxing turned around resolutely and said while walking, Don't worry, leader Yu. No one can pry a word of the secret of World Chamber of Commerce out of my mouth. If you let me go today, I hope I can come back alive to repay you. He knew that he was no match for Yu Qianqiu. If Yu Qianqiu didn't let him go, he couldn't leave at all. Moreover, there was Green-Winged Bat King Wei Chuanxiu, who was at the early stage of Immortal Emperor beside Yu Qianqiu. He also knew that Yu Qianqiu was a cruel and merciless person. He was gambling. Yu Qianqiu looked ferociously at Li Duxing's back disappearing in the corridor. He clenched his fists behind his back, but for some reason, he didn't do anything to him in the end. Wei Chuanxiu, who was sitting cross-legged, stood up at some point. Looking at Li Duxing's disappearing back, he said thoughtfully, The fragrance of plum blossoms comes from the bitter cold. Only by climbing the perilous peak can you see the wonderful scenery that others can't. People are born in hardships and die in peace. This person has a high state of mind, and his talent in cultivation is also extraordinary. He may have a place in the immortal realm in the future, but the premise is that he can save his life outside. Damn it. You're all crazy and self-righteous. Be careful that no one will collect your corpse when you die outside. Yu Qianqiu waved his hand and shouted very unhappily. Fortunately, Wei Chuanxiu had set a soundproof bounded domain here, otherwise it would disturb Bai Suzhen's repair. To be honest, after getting along with these people for a long time, I always have a question. Where did you get these subordinates of yours in the Huashan realm? These people are definitely not like the disciples in the Huashan realm of ordinary sects, nor are they like the individual cultivators outside. Each of them has an extraordinary aptitude, and their talent in cultivation is also stronger than the other. They are all rare seedlings. If they can be given some time and opportunities, their achievements in the future should not be too bad. Yu Qianqiu rolled his eyes on the spot and said, It's none of your business. Wei Chuanxiu snorted and said, I saw that you wanted to kill him just now. Why did you let him go? Am I that kind of person who kills innocent people? Yu Qianqiu said angrily. Oh. Wei Chuanxiu said noncommittally. Then he asked curiously, Who on earth is your master? From what he said just now, it seems that your master is not simple. Anyway, he is better than you. Yu Qianqiu's words were sarcastic. Obviously, he was in a bad mood. There were only a few top masters in the human world, but the two most powerful ones had left him. Wei Chuanxiu snorted coldly. He didn't take Yu Qianqiu's words seriously. He had weighed Li Duxing's cultivation, and it was really not worth mentioning. However, Li Duxing could escape from the hands of Master Yu Qianqiu. Then it could be imagined that Master Yu Qianqiu's cultivation was high. Hearing his disdainful sneer, Yu Qianqiu rolled his eyes at him. He didn't bother to explain anything to him, and there was no need to use Bai Changchun to show off. After all, he didn't know whether Bai Changchun was dead or alive. Thus, he swung his sleeves and left. Wei Chuanxiu shouted behind him, You'd better pay attention to the things that Bai Suzhen needs for cultivation. Got it. Yu Qianqiu replied, went directly to a room on the 22nd floor, opened the window, and flew out. He originally wanted to express his condolences to Shui Mingxing's death at the branch of Chaotian Palace in the hallucinatory Immortal City. Unexpectedly, as soon as he flew out of the territory of the World Chamber of Commerce, he found that he was targeted. Looking back, he saw 3 people in blue following him. Judging from their clothes, they were from the Heartless Palace. It seemed that Yu Nanshan's information was right. Sangyin Xian really targeted him and wanted to avenge his grandson. Yu Qianqiu sneered. He thought that the people of the Heartless Palace dared not attack him in the hallucinatory immortal city, so he let them follow him. After landing outside the gate of the Chaotian Palace, he looked around. The three people in blue were floating in a triangle above the branch of the Chaotian Palace. It was clear that they didn't want to give him any chance to slip away. Yu Qianqiu didn't bother to pay attention to them and strode into the branch of the Chaotian Palace. As soon as he entered, someone immediately went to inform the elder in charge of the Chaotian Palace. Ye Donglu stood at the door of the back hall with a smile on his face and welcomed him in. After both sides sat down, Ye Donglu asked with a smile, "Welcome, sect leader Yu. What can I do for you?" Yu Qianqiu asked with a dignified expression, "I heard that Shui Mingqing was killed in the Chaotian Palace. Is this true?" Ye Donglu's expression froze. This matter had caused quite a stir in the Chaotian Palace. Although it was a small disciple who died, the serious thing was that someone had secretly killed someone in the Chaotian Palace without anyone knowing. What was even more frightening was that they did not know whether the murderer was an insider of Skyward Palace or an outsider who had sneaked in to do it. However, Shui Mingqing's master, Master Yifuzi, insisted that it was his own people who had done it. He first targeted several of his opponents in the sect. In fact, many people in the Chaotian Palace thought the same, because there was really no need for outsiders to sneak in and kill a small disciple like Shui Mingqing. However, because the ranking contest was imminent, this matter was temporarily suppressed by the Chaotian Palace leader. However, after this matter spread to the outside world, there were various versions. Because Shui Mingqing was somewhat famous outside, it became a moderate scandal in the Palace of Heaven. Many people suspected that it was the result of internal strife in the Palace of Heaven. It seems to be true. After a moment of regret, Yu Qianqiu said with an angry expression, "Brother Shui has always been modest and has never offended anyone. I didn't expect someone to kill him. Don't let me know who did it, or I won't forgive him." Ye Donglu forced a smile and said, "It seems that the relationship between sect leader Yu and Shui Mingqing is not shallow. However, this is our own matter, and we will solve it ourselves. We don't need outsiders to intervene." Yu Qianqiu said with an unfriendly expression, "Oh, don't misunderstand. I don't want to intervene in the affairs of your Chaotian Palace, but I have no choice. Everyone knows that I have a good relationship with Shui Mingqing, so it's a bit unreasonable not to say anything. I'm just going through the motions, and I'll leave after a while. Did sect leader you come here for this matter?" Ye Donglu changed the topic indifferently. "I heard that the Heartless Palace's high priest, Sangyin Xian, has personally taken charge of the fantasy immortal city. There is news that he is here for you. Sect leader you need to prepare early." The two of them suddenly didn't see eye to eye. After a while, Yu Qianqiu said goodbye. After leaving the Chaotian Palace branch, he glanced at the sky and found that the three people were still guarding in the air. He immediately turned into a stream of light and rushed out of the fantasy immortal city. Turning into a stream of light, immortal stage cultivation? The three people were stunned and looked at each other, thinking that they had seen wrong. However, the three of them clearly saw that the person who left was indeed Yu Qianqiu. Chapter 930. Follow him, don't let him escape. Two streams of light immediately chased after Yu Qianqiu while the other person quickly took out a jade talisman and crushed it. Soon, a stream of light shot out from the Passionless Palace branch and chased after Yu Qianqiu. This person was none other than Sangyin Xian, who had been waiting in the hallucination immortal city for a long time. Suddenly, someone said in surprise, "It's World Commerce's sect leader Yu Qianqiu. His cultivation base has broken through to immortal level?" Soon, another two streams of light flashed before everyone's eyes. Someone clicked his tongue and said, "It's Passionless Palace's people chasing after Yu Qianqiu. This Passionless Palace is really capable. They actually forced Yu Qianqiu, the coward, out of the hallucination immortal city." Streams of light appeared and looked. Soon, another stream of light flashed like a star arrow. Many people cried out, "It's Tsungin Xian." Yu Qianqiu was forced out of the hallucination immortal city. Tsungin Xian personally chased after him. "There's going to be a show." "Not necessarily. I heard that Tsungin Xian couldn't kill Yu Qianqiu in the blissful immortal realm. I'm afraid Tsungin Xian was worried about the immortal palace and couldn't make a move under their watch. That's why Yu Qianqiu was lucky enough to escape. They're all going to watch the show. Come, let's go take a look too." The people floating in the air turned into streams of light and chased after them like a meteor shower. On the top floor of the world commerce, Yun Peng's eyes suddenly became as sharp as an eagle's. He stared at the people flocking in the distance. However, the distance was too far. He didn't see that Yu Qianqiu was being chased, so he just looked and didn't take it to heart. In the Skyward Palace branch, a disciple quickly ran into the inner hall and reported to the Yadong Lu with cupped fists, reporting to Elder. The World Commerce Chamber of Commerce's sect leader was targeted by the Heartless Palace as soon as he left our place. At this moment, he has already been chased out of illusory immortal city by the people of Heartless Palace, and Heartless Palace's grand revered Tsungin Xian has personally chased after him. What? Yadong Lu, who was sitting calmly in the inner hall, suddenly turned around and said in shock, "Yu Qianqiu must have taken the wrong medicine. Of all places to run, they actually ran outside the illusory immortal city. Wasn't this courting death? Oh right, is there any movement from the World Chamber of Commerce?" This disciple specially observed for a while. Everything happened so suddenly and there was no movement from the World Commerce Association. It seems like they don't know that Yu Qianqiu is being pursued by the Heartless Palace. Strange, what method did the Heartless Palace use to actually force the coward Yu Qianqiu out of the illusory immortal city? Yadong Lu pondered for a while, then narrowed his eyes and laughed sinisterly. "The Heartless Palace has been in the limelight these years. I want to see the scene of Cyan Wing Bat King and White Cloud Mountain Master joining hands to fight Tsungin Xian. I wonder if Tsungin Xian can block the two of them. The battle of three early-stage Immortal Emperor experts is really exciting." As soon as he finished speaking, Yadong Lu turned into a stream of light and shot out of the inner hall directly towards the direction of the World Commerce Association. After flying above the World Commerce Association, Yadong Lu immediately noticed that Yun Peng's eyes were locked on him. He flashed and landed beside Yun Peng. Before Yun Peng could do anything, he cupped his hands and exclaimed, "Senior Yun, it's bad. When Yu Qianqiu came out of my Heaven Palace branch, he was targeted by the Heartless Palace. Now he has been tricked out of the illusory immortal city by the Heartless Palace's High Priest Tsungin Xian is personally pursuing him. Yu Qianqiu is in danger. Please be prepared, Senior Yun." The cold and indifferent Yun Peng's eyes narrowed when he heard that. He had seen Yu Qianqiu leave earlier and he had also seen Yu Qianqiu being targeted by the people of Heartless Palace. However, when he thought about how the people of Heartless Palace didn't dare to do anything to Yu Qianqiu within the illusionary immortal city, he didn't take it to heart. How could he have known that Yu Qianqiu would be so stupid as to run out of the illusory immortal city? A green shadow swept over and Wei Chuanxiu appeared. His small eyes emitted a faint green light as he stared at Yadong Lu and shouted sternly, "Is what you said true?" Yadong Lu had always wanted the world to be in chaos, so he deliberately raised his voice to let Wei Chuanxiu hear him. Now that he had succeeded, he couldn't help but be secretly delighted. He immediately cupped his hands and said with a solemn expression, "Senior Wei, I saw it with my own eyes. It can't be wrong." Wei Chuanxiu suddenly turned his head and looked into the distance. He could still see streams of light gathering in one direction. They were actually people rushing to watch the show. He pointed and asked, "That direction?" Senior Wei is wise. It's that direction. Yadonglu's attitude was unprecedentedly polite and respectful. Wei Chuanxiu immediately looked at Yun Peng with a sinister expression and said, "There's no time to lose. You and I will go together and kill that Song guy." Yun Peng frowned and stared sharply at Yadonglu. He said in a deep voice, "The human heart is sinister. It's obvious that this person came with evil intentions. You guard here and be careful of someone taking advantage of the situation." After saying that, he turned into a white stream of light and flew at a speed faster than a meteor, creating waves in the air. He quickly flew in the direction that everyone was rushing to. Yadonglu was speechless by Yunpeng's words. He wanted to explain but found that Yunpeng had already left. He didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He had long heard that White Cloud Mountain Master didn't have a good impression of humans, but he didn't expect his words to be so direct. He didn't even hold back and said that he came with evil intentions in front of him. If he had known earlier, he wouldn't have come personally. Wei Chuanxiu was currently in a very bad mood. In addition to Yun Peng's words, he immediately shouted at Yadonglu, "Scram!" Yadonglu was stunned and wanted to slap himself. He could only blame it on his bad luck and dejectedly left. He also flew in the direction that everyone was flying to watch the show. Wei Chuanxiu cast his gaze into the distance. At this moment, Bai Suzhen was quietly cultivating. Without anyone protecting her, it would be very dangerous for her. However, Yu Qianqiu was in control of his Niden. If something were to happen, he would be in deep trouble. He calmed his mind and returned downstairs to continue protecting Bai Suzhen. Yu Qianqiu flew as fast as lightning out of the hallucinatory immortal city. He looked back in the air and saw two streams of light quickly catching up. He immediately sneered and muttered, "Good, I'll use you two to test the waters." He immediately held two purple flames in his palms and sped through the air without looking back. At this time, a sudden gust of wind rose high up in the sky, but in the blink of an eye, there was a faint rumbling sound of thunder in the sky. For a time, the wind rose and the clouds surged, and the sky gradually darkened. No one knew where the gray fog came from, but the world was filled with a gloomy haze. The two streams of light that were about to catch up with Yu Qianqiu suddenly felt a huge resistance. Their speed immediately dropped. Their cultivation was clearly higher than Yu Qianqiu's, but at this moment, the distance between them and Yu Qianqiu was getting bigger and bigger. The two looked at each other speechlessly with bewilderment in their eyes. They saw the gale in front of them like stormy waves pushing forward layer by layer. The wind was like a blade, so they had no choice but to protect themselves with their earth energy. They immediately heard the sound of knocking on their earth energy shields. What caused the two of them to be bewildered was that such a rare and powerful wind resistance seemed to have no effect on Yu Qianqiu, who was in front of them. That guy was still flying very nimbly as he frantically fled forward, widening the distance between him and the two of them. The gale became stronger and stronger, and the gray fog in the sky became darker and denser. Not long after, the dark sky was filled with crackling thunderbolts, and the rumbling sound of thunder and lightning could be heard everywhere. Yu Qianqiu was like a swift in the storm, happily shuttling through the crisscrossing thunder. After rushing to the center of the minefield in the sky, Yu Qianqiu immediately calmed down. He suddenly stopped flying and turned around to hover in the air. He coldly looked at the two people who were chasing after him. The gale suddenly weakened, and the two people immediately felt the strong wind pressure disappear. They immediately rushed over, but when they flew to the edge of the minefield, they stopped at the same time. Looking at the unfathomable thick and thin zigzagging thunder under the dark clouds, the two people looked at each other. Thunder was not something to be trifled with. It was impossible to predict when it would strike here and there. Most importantly, the speed of thunder was too fast. It was not much inferior to teleportation, and it was very difficult to dodge. A streak of light shot over, and Grey Cloud Xian appeared between the two of them. He was also startled by the lightning bolts that filled the sky. He did not know how such a situation could occur. Such a dense amount of lightning bolts was simply unimaginable, giving off a feeling of the wrath of the heavens and the resentment of men. Tsungyin Xian, your heartless palace is chasing after me relentlessly. What is your intention? Yu Qianqiu asked despite knowing the answer. Tsungyin Xian's gaze quickly turned to the center of the minefield. He saw Yu Qianqiu standing there quietly. In the darkness, zigzagging and sinister lightning flashed in front of him, behind him, and to his left and right. It was a very shocking scene. The crowd that came to watch the show also looked at each other when they saw this scene. A cold smile gradually appeared on Sung Yin Xian's face. This brat was obviously at the end of his rope. In order to escape, he actually took the risk to hide in the minefield. He immediately laughed wildly and said, "Yu Qianqiu, when you killed Sung Lianqing, you should have known that this day would come. Now that death is at hand, let's see where you can run to." "Run? With just a shameless old dog like you?" Yu Qianqiu said with a disdainful expression, "The world is so big. I can leave and stay as I please. This was proven when you chased after me in the Paradise Wonderland. What can you do to me?" The crowd that was watching the show immediately burst into an uproar. They all sighed at this guy's audacity. He actually dared to speak to Sung Yin Xian like this. It seemed like he really knew that death was at hand and was ready to throw caution to the wind. Under the flickering lightning, Sung Yin Xian's expression was a little twisted. Yu Qianqiu's words had really hit his soft spot. That time, he had let Yu Qianqiu escape right under his nose. He had always been deeply ashamed, and the last thing he wanted was to hear someone mention it to his face. He immediately ordered in a low voice, "Kill him." Chapter 931. The two people on the left and right looked at the lightning that was like the roots of a large tree and felt their scalps go numb. They didn't have the courage to ask Yu Qianqiu to be struck by lightning, so they couldn't help but be stunned. Yu Qianqiu, who was in the center of the lightning zone, laughed and said, "As the saying goes, soldiers are all in one, generals are all in one. The great consecrator of Heartless Palace is afraid of death and actually wants his disciples to come out and die. You have really opened my eyes." Everyone's gazes immediately landed on Sung Yin Xian. Sung Yin Xian's countenance instantly turned ashen. The thunderbolts that filled the sky had indeed caused him to feel apprehensive. He had sent his two disciples to act as a safety measure. He wanted to see how powerful the thunderbolts were. If his two disciples could dodge and deal with it, then he could naturally deal with it as well. "Kill him!" Sung Yin Xian shouted angrily. He wanted to force his two disciples into the lightning zone to test the waters. Now that things had come to this, the two disciples had no way out. They looked at each other and gritted their teeth. Both of them took out their flying swords. Two rays of light cut through the dark space and rapidly attacked Yu Qianqiu, who was in the depths of the lightning zone. They had a good idea, hoping that long-range attacks could kill Yu Qianqiu. Of course, they also wanted to test the safety of using their flying swords. Unfortunately, as soon as the two rays of light entered the lightning zone, they immediately provoked the heavenly thunder. More than a dozen bolts of lightning mercilessly struck down. 2 bolts of lightning immediately created 2 balls of sparks in the air. The 2 flying swords appeared, but the bodies of the swords were already scorched black. The strand of divine sense that was placed in the swords was also shattered by the heavenly thunder. They lost control and fell from the sky. The crowd that was watching the show gasped. If even the flying swords couldn't get past it, how could a human do it? But looking at Yu Qianqiu, who was in the center of the lightning zone, that guy was quite bold, but his luck was also quite good. Every time the furious lightning passed by him, it just couldn't hit him. It really was like seeing a ghost. The 2 Heartless Palace disciples looked at each other. With the flashes of lightning, they could see the sweat on each other's foreheads. Their faces were slightly pale. Could they break in? What was the difference between that and suicide? Grey Cloud Xian's expression was gloomy and gloomy. He could naturally tell that it was too dangerous to force his way in. It would be inexcusable to force his 2 disciples to go in. He was already cursing in his heart. This bastard's luck was really good. Of all places to hide, he just had to hide in this lightning zone. He felt a little helpless and powerless. Yunpeng had long since arrived at the back of the crowd. When he saw this scene, he couldn't help but be taken aback. He hadn't expected something like this to happen. He wasn't in a hurry to make a move, because Yu Qianqiu was hiding in the minefield, and he wasn't very confident that he could enter and exit it freely. "You cowardly tortoise, come out if you have the ability." Sunyin Xian forcefully roared. Yu Qianqiu sneered and said, "Old fart, I'm standing here with an indomitable spirit. Everyone can see that. How can you say I'm a coward? It's obvious that you don't dare to come in, but you're still splashing dirty water on me. Touch your face. Don't you feel ashamed?" Then he suddenly shouted angrily, "Old fart, do you dare to come in and fight me?" As soon as these words came out, the crowd was in an uproar. Grey Cloud Xian was so angry that he was trembling slightly. If he didn't accept the challenge, he wouldn't be able to come out and meet people in the future. A pale golden ball of light suddenly erupted from his body. Protective aura covered his body, and his figure flashed. Without hesitation, he directly entered the minefield. Seeing that he wasn't afraid of the lightning, Yu Qianqiu was slightly shocked and subconsciously prepared to escape. But then he saw that Grey Cloud Xian didn't dare to recklessly barge into the minefield with his protective aura. Instead, he was cautiously approaching. He immediately heaved a sigh of relief. It seemed that this old fart was still afraid. That was good. With a thought, Yu Qianqiu struck down a few heavenly lightning roaring roars, but Grey Cloud Xian nimbly dodged them all. Yu Qianqiu was shocked once more when he saw Chen Shi getting closer and closer. If a fellow with such a cultivation were to close the distance between them, then every single move Chen Shi made might take his life. As soon as he became nervous, the thunderbolts in the sky also became tense. Suddenly, like a series of cannons, they struck randomly in the sky, almost cutting off Grey Cloud Xian's space to dodge. Everyone stared unblinkingly at this terrifying scene. However, Grey Cloud Xian was indeed worthy of being the chief high priest of Heartless Palace. In a situation where he could not dodge, he brazenly raised the defense of his Great Dipper energy to the limit. The pale golden protective aura on his body immediately became overflowing with flowing light, like a bright pearl in the dark sky. Several heavenly lightning roaring roars struck the protective aura, but it only made him tremble slightly. He actually forcefully withstood it with his great cultivation. "Humph. That's all you've got." Grey Cloud Xian stared at Yu Qianqiu and sneered, "Let's see where you can run today." Facing the dozens of thunderbolts, he didn't even dodge. With a whoosh, he forcibly rushed toward Yu Qianqiu. "Damn it. You're awesome." Yu Qianqiu was so frightened that he trembled. He immediately clenched his fists. The dark clouds in the sky immediately flashed with lightning and thunder, illuminating the sky and earth in a vast expanse of white. It seemed that Grey Cloud Xian's arrogant words had completely angered him. Everyone was stunned by the scene in front of them. There seemed to be countless thunderous hands reaching out from the dark clouds and grabbing towards Sunyin Xian. Immediately, someone said in astonishment, "Sunyin Xian's words have offended the heavens." Grey Cloud Xian, who was rushing forward quickly, was instantly frightened. He immediately used all his cultivation to resist the heavenly tribulation. Now, how could he still have the mood to chase after Yu Qianqiu? Bam, 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 bam. Hundreds and thousands of explosions blasted on Grey Cloud Xian's aura shield. His whole body was as dazzling as if he was hiding in an incandescent light bulb, causing him to rapidly sink down from the sky. The dense thunderous explosions made everyone's ears go numb. However, Grey Cloud Xian was really not an ordinary kind of valiant. Under such a dense bombardment of thunderbolts, his aura shield could actually resist and not be shattered by the heavenly thunder. F***CK. Even this old pervert can't kill you? Yu Qianqiu looked up into the sky. In the dark clouds, the electric snakes from all directions shuttled and gathered, entangling into a super-large thunderbolt with a diameter of 5 or 6 meters. It suddenly struck down as if it wanted to poke a big hole in the ground. Boom! An earth-shattering sound rang out, as if space itself was about to be torn apart. The incomparably majestic energy pillar accurately bombarded the protective aura shield below, which was overflowing with golden light. Almost at the same time, an angry roar that was condensed from countless years of cultivation suddenly burst out, overshadowing the earth-shattering noise. Absolute heaven, absolute earth, absolute emotion, 3 swords as one, sword-drawing style. A hysterical roar, an explosion of endless potential, everything reverberated between heaven and earth in this one sentence. This was a roar that fought against death and fate. The golden aura shield suddenly shrank back into Grey Cloud Xian's body. Everyone's eyes were focused on it. Yunpeng's pupils suddenly shrank to the size of a needle's eye, filled with disbelief. Just as the thunderbolt was about to strike Tsungyan Xian, a dazzling swordlight was pulled out of his sleeve. The green-white swordlight that was pulled out was even more dazzling than the huge thunderbolt that came crashing down from the sky. Its sharp tip pointed straight to the sky and suddenly expanded into a huge sword. Like a heavenly sword, it was about to pierce through the dark sky. Boom! Grey Cloud Xian held the huge sword in his hand and soared into the sky like a dragon. His aura erupted to an unprecedented peak as he directly pulled out his sword and smashed the huge thunderbolt sword that came crashing down. His cultivation had broken through the shackles at the most critical moment when his life was on the line, reaching a whole new realm. Bang! The two peerlessly powerful energies collided, exploded, and spread out. The space shook violently, and the powerful shock wave was like the explosion of a nuclear weapon, rushing out in all directions with an unstoppable momentum. The dark clouds that filled the sky with lightning and thunder were scattered by such a powerful shock wave. The blue sky appeared like a rapidly inflated balloon, and the golden sunlight quickly shone down from the spreading gap, forming a spectacular and enchanting spectacle. Pfft! Grey Cloud Xian suddenly spat out a mouthful of blood and fell straight to the ground below. He knelt on one knee and used his sword as a pillar. He buried his head and panted. Under his messy hair, a long line of blood dripped down from the corner of his mouth. Heartless Palace's three swords as one, sword drawing style. The crowd that was watching the show burst into exclamations. Everyone turned around and fled under the pursuit of the huge shock wave. Oh my God! Was he still human? This was like the explosion of a nuclear weapon. Yu Qianqiu was scared out of his wits. There was a trail of blood on his lips, and he looked at the shock wave in disbelief. Almost at the same time as the shock wave exploded, a loud and resounding cry rang out. The cloud rock brazenly revealed its true form. It spread its jade-white wings and spun like a shuttle. It drew a dazzling white light and directly rushed towards the shock wave, brazenly traversing the majestic shock wave. Just as Yu Qianqiu came to his senses and was about to flee back to Utopia in fear, he suddenly saw the cloud rock pouncing over in its true form, wrapping its two large claws around him. After grabbing Yu Qianqiu, the cloud rock spread its wings again and soared into the sky. In the blink of an eye, it soared into the sky and narrowly avoided the shock wave below. A pair of large golden eyes stared down below. Grey Cloud Xian, who was on the ground, was also looking up at him with his head raised. The cloud rock did not stay any longer. It carried Yu Qianqiu and quickly flew towards the illusory immortal city. Cloud rock. You can protect him now, but you can't protect him forever. Grey Cloud Xian's angry roar resounded through the heavens and earth. He knew that he could not catch up to the cloud rock. Moreover, he was injured, so he could only roar to vent his anger. Within the illusory immortal city, almost all the people from the various sects flew into the sky, including the people from the Chamber of Commerce Alliance. An earth-shattering sound came from afar, and it indeed shocked everyone. This kind of commotion could only be caused by a battle between immortal emperors. A white stream of light flew towards the World Commerce Alliance at an unbelievable speed. The experts of the various sects in the illusory immortal city immediately saw that it was the cloud rock flying in its true form. Everyone had more or less received the news that Grey Cloud Xian had gone to chase after Yu Qianqiu. Now that they saw the cloud rock flying in its true form, coupled with the commotion just now, everyone had reason to suspect that the cloud rock and Grey Cloud Xian were fighting. The great bright wheel, which was floating in the sky, frowned and shot towards the World Commerce Alliance in a flash. Chapter 932. Yu Qianqiu's body flashed and landed on the rooftop of the World Commerce Association. Yunpeng quickly returned to his original form and landed as well. Both of them didn't look too good, especially Yu Qianqiu, whose mouth was still stained with blood. Wei Chuanxiu quickly sized up the two and heaved a sigh of relief when he saw that there was nothing wrong with them. He had also been alarmed by the huge commotion in the distance. At this moment, De Mingluan flashed over and looked at Yun Peng and Yu Qianqiu. He said in a low voice, "Yun Peng, did you fight with Sangyin Xian?" Yun Peng shook his head with a grave expression. "Fuck. That old bastard is really abnormal. Is he interested in me pretending to be a pig to eat a tiger? He actually hit a big killer move." Yu Qianqiu spat out a mouthful of bloody saliva and cursed as he wiped the blood off his mouth. Although Sangyin Xian's earth-shattering attack didn't directly affect him, he was injured by the momentum that shook the heaven and earth. It would have been better if he hadn't spoken, but as soon as he did, Wei Chuanxiu's anger flared up and he yelled at him, "Kid, there's something wrong with your brain. You knew that guy was waiting for a chance to deal with you, but you still dared to run out of hallucinatory immortal city. You're courting death. It doesn't matter if you die, but don't drag others down with you." Yu Qianqiu opened his mouth but shut it in the end. He wanted to lure Sangyin Xian out by relying on his ability to control the heavenly lightning. Who knew that Sangyin Xian was indeed an expert at the immortal emperor stage? His cultivation was simply too powerful. He wasn't someone that Mo Wuji could deal with. He finally understood that with his early minor immortal cultivation, it was better to avoid provoking immortal emperor experts in the future. De Mingluan looked suspiciously at Yu Qianqiu and asked Yun Peng, "Such a big commotion. If it wasn't you fighting Sangyin Xian, could it be him? Or could it be someone else?" Yun Peng was stunned by the question. He thought about it carefully and really didn't know who Sangyin Xian was fighting. Yu Qianqiu rolled his eyes and remained silent. Wei Chuanxiu scratched his head and said, "Is there something you can't tell us?" Yun Peng shook his head and said, "This is really unimaginable. I don't know who he is fighting with, but..." Sangyin Xian's potential exploded at the critical moment. He actually broke through to the intermediate stage of the Immortal Emperor stage in one go and comprehended the Heartless Palace's 3 swords as one sword drawing style in one go. It was precisely because of the formidable power of the 3-in-1 sword drawing stance that he was able to survive. Otherwise, he would have definitely died this time. Heartless Palace's 3-in-1 sword drawing style. Great Bright Wheel and Wei Chuanxiu exclaimed at the same time, their faces filled with disbelief. Not bad. Yun Peng nodded slowly and said, "Absolute heaven, absolute earth, absolute emotion, 3 swords as one, sword drawing technique." After a moment of silence, Wei Chuanxiu let out a sigh of relief and exclaimed, "This is really unexpected." Sangyin Xian actually comprehended the 3-in-1 sword drawing stance. The Heartless Palace's position as the #1 sect in the celestial world is becoming more and more stable. Seeing the 3 early-stage Immortal Emperor experts exclaim repeatedly, Yu Qianqiu couldn't help but ask, could it be that this sword-drawing stance is very famous in the celestial world? Wei Chuanxiu subconsciously replied and sighed, "The Heartless Palace's sword-drawing stance is famous in the celestial world. It is the Heartless Palace's ultimate technique." The Heartless Palace relied on this technique to secure their position as the #1 sect in the celestial world. The sword drawing style has 1 absolute heaven, 2 absolute earth, and 3 heartless. Most of the Heartless Palace's disciples would find it extremely difficult to master the first sword, let alone the last 2. It's even more difficult to fuse the 2 sword styles into 1 sword drawing style. In that case, isn't Sangyin Xian's 3-in-1 sword drawing stance the strongest sword drawing stance of the Heartless Palace? Yu Qianqiu asked. Yes. Wei Chuanxiu said in amazement. Before this, only the sect leader of the Heartless Palace, Wang Qing, could fuse 3 swords into 1 sword drawing stance. It is said that Wang Qing was a very handsome man, but in order to sever his emotions and desires to fuse 3 swords into 1 sword drawing stance, he killed his wife and children and killed his entire family. In the end, he didn't stop and didn't even let himself off. He actually destroyed his own face. In the end, his hard work paid off and he really mastered the 3-in-1 sword drawing stance. Because of this, most of the other sects in the celestial world became family sections. Only the Heartless Palace is an exception. Deming Luan nodded slightly, looking at the past and present. Those peerless experts have a mind that is hard to reach. Very few of them would drag their families down with them. These words made Yu Qianqiu sigh. He first thought of his master. Bai Changchun was the same. He pursued the peak of cultivation and didn't care about his family. Yu Qianqiu thought of himself and couldn't help but smile bitterly in his heart. Suddenly, Yun Peng thought about it and interrupted. If I'm not wrong, Sangyin Xian should be thankful for what happened today. If he wasn't forced into a desperate situation, it would be very difficult for him to break through this shackle and instantly comprehend the 3-in-1 sword drawing stance of the Heartless Palace. I have to say that it's fate. It can be considered his luck. Yu Qianqiu was taken aback. He gulped with difficulty and said, "You mean that the reason Sangyin Xian was able to comprehend the 3-in-1 sword drawing style was because he was forced to do so by that bolt of lightning?" "That's just my guess, but I'm pretty sure that's the case." Yun Peng glanced at him and said, "Otherwise, based on the fact that you killed his only grandson, he wouldn't have bothered talking to you in that situation. Once he used the 3-in-1 sword drawing stance, you would have been dead. Why did he have to suffer so much and only draw his sword in the end?" Yu Qianqiu was dumbfounded. In that case, he had helped Sangyin Xian greatly by not killing him with the heavenly lightning? This matter was, Motherf *Ker. When Yu Qianqiu thought about how Sangyin Xian would use that frightening 3-in-1 sword drawing stance to deal with him in the future, his scalp went numb. One thing was certain. Sangyin Xian would definitely not let him go. He coughed and asked, "Is there any way to defend or break this 3-in-1 sword drawing stance of the Heartless Palace?" The three of them looked at him together and guessed his concerns. Wei Chuanxiu sneered and said, "You want to defend and break it? With your abilities? Let me tell you, try your best to avoid him in the future. Not meeting him is the best way to save your life." Deming Luan nodded and explained, "Those who have cultivated the 3-in-1 sword drawing stance in the Heartless Palace will carry a few swords that they won't use easily. Absolute Heaven, Absolute Earth, Absolute Emotion, 2-in-1 sword drawing stance, and 3-in-1 sword drawing stance basically have a matching sword. Those who have cultivated all 5 sword drawing stances will usually carry 5 swords that they won't use easily. These 5 swords represent the peak sword intents of the user's 5 types and cultivation. It's fine if they're not drawn, but once they're drawn, they'll be earth-shattering. Each sword is stronger than the last, especially the 5th sword that represents the 3-in-1 sword drawing stance. Very few people in the 3 realms can block this move." Yu Qianqiu didn't know whether to laugh or cry when he heard this. Very few people in the 3 realms can block this move? Deming Luan nodded and then added, "After the Heartless Palace's sect master, Wang Qing, mastered the 3-in-1 sword drawing stance, other than that time when he was defeated by the immortal emperor, he has never had an opponent. It's probably very difficult for anyone in the 13 great immortal monarchs to be able to block Wang Qing's 3-in-1 sword drawing stance. Of course, Sangyin Xian has just mastered it, so there's definitely a big gap between him and Wang Qing. However, at least the 3 of us can't block Sangyin Xian's 3-in-1 sword drawing stance. As for you, there's no need to talk about it." He changed the topic and ignored Yu Qianqiu. He turned to Yun Peng and asked, "What happened just now?" Wei Chuanxiu also looked at him curiously. Yun Peng was silent for a while, then he told them what happened when the thunderbolts attacked Sangyin Xian. After listening to him, Deming Luan and Wei Chuanxiu felt that it was a little unbelievable. They had never heard of such a strange thing. They couldn't help but look at Yu Qianqiu in confusion, as if they were asking, "Why did the lightning only target Sangyin Xian, but nothing happened to you at all?" Yu Qianqiu hurriedly shook his head and said, "I don't know what happened either, but there's one thing I'm sure of. Sangyin Xian's rude words angered the heavens, and in the end, he was punished by thunderbolts. Many people saw this with their own eyes." Deming Luan and Wei Chuanxiu looked at Yun Peng in unison. They didn't quite believe this explanation. Yun Peng was speechless. At that time, Sangyin Xian did say to the thunderbolts in the sky that it was only so-so, but was that really the reason? That was a little too mysterious. Seeing that he couldn't get an answer, De Mingluan didn't want to stay any longer. After all, because of his identity, he couldn't stay for long, so he immediately said goodbye to them and left. Apart from Yun Peng on the rooftop, the other two went down to the 22nd floor. In the corridor, Wei Chuanqiu suddenly asked sneakily via voice transmission, "Yu Qianqiu, tell me honestly. Are you related to the heavenly lightning targeting Sangyin Xian?" Yu Qianqiu asked curiously, "Why would you have such an idea? Do you think I can control the heavenly lightning?" He did not directly say that he couldn't control it and let the other party think about it himself. Wei Chuanqiu frowned and thought about it, but she also felt that it was unlikely. After the two of them split up, Yu Qianqiu returned to Utopia. He first looked for Zhang Peng to ask about the progress of the pill refinement. Chen Feng did not delay, but after all, he had limited manpower, and the speed of the refinement was indeed not satisfactory. He paced back and forth in the military camp's conference room for a while before disappearing. In China, the headquarters of the Hong Gang and the Qin Gang were still under the big tree in front of the flat ground halfway up the mountain behind the mountain god temple. Hong Qi and Gu Qinyun were summoned together. Yu Qianqiu looked at the mountain god temple with green smoke curling up from the foot of the mountain. He reached out to touch the rough bark of the big tree and slowly said, "Gu Qinyun, immediately send a group of people overseas to search for the volcanic island. Hong Qi, send someone to pass on my order. Gather all the cultivators in the world who know how to refine pills and gather in the East Holy Land." Chapter 933. Gu Qinyun, on the other hand, had no objections and immediately accepted the order. However, Hong Qi was somewhat hesitant. "Master, you just told me this matter before. I still haven't figured out the situation. I'm afraid it will be difficult to gather all the cultivators in the world who can refine pills in a short period of time. Why don't you give me some time first? There's no time for you to slowly prepare." Yu Qianqiu turned around, looked at him and said slowly, "Directly order the recruitment to the entire cultivation world. If anyone is found to be avoiding the recruitment, kill without mercy. There's no need to play cat and mouse with them at this time. Whoever wants to play can die." "Understood." Hong Qi cupped his hands in response. After Yu Qianqiu explained the matter clearly, he did not stay any longer and disappeared in the blink of an eye. Within the ruins of God, Yu Qianqiu appeared in the small valley where he had saved Shui Mingqing. His trip this time was to scout the way and prepare for the subsequent actions. The valley was still the same valley, nothing had changed. Yu Qianqiu carefully looked around. There were only some short old branches that had grown for who knew how many years, looking somewhat sinister in the mist, but he did not find any danger. The surroundings were very quiet. He immediately flew to the top of the mountain and looked around. Just like before, the world was still covered in white, and his vision could not see far away. Whoosh! Yu Qianqiu's body turned into a stream of light and quickly flew away. With the valley as the center, he flew close to the ground and circled around. Occasionally, he could see some strange and abnormally timid animals that were scared away by him. After walking around, he felt that there was no danger and finally felt a lot more at ease. He then changed his direction and flew towards the direction of the thick fog wall that connected the heavens and the earth. Now that his cultivation had stepped into the immortal stage, he felt that he had some ability to protect himself. He wanted to see what was hidden behind the fog wall. With his current flying speed, it didn't take him half a day to stop in front of the fog wall that connected the heavens and the earth. Thinking back to the scene of several experts from the immortal palace joining hands to kill a giant snake, he was somewhat hesitant to go in. After hesitating for a while, he clenched his teeth and rushed in. However, his flying speed had already slowed down. He released his divine sense to investigate the surroundings as he slowly advanced forward. Who would have thought that after spending half a day, he still wouldn't be able to break through the thick fog that was so thick that he couldn't even see his own fingers in front of him? This made him even more cautious. One must know that the more unknown a place was, the easier it was for one's nerves to be on edge. At first, he did not notice anything unusual in the thick fog, but as he went deeper and deeper, he began to hear the occasional dull sound of something being crushed. There was also the sound of heavy breathing that sounded like bellows, as if some huge animal was walking below. Just as Yu Qianqiu was about to use his divine sense to check what it was, he suddenly discovered that his body, which was moving forward, had come to a halt. After struggling for a moment, he felt as though he had slammed into a large net, and his whole body seemed to have been entangled in the net. F***ck. Did someone set a trap here? Yu Qianqiu was shocked. He had been using his divine sense to explore the way. How could there be such a large net lying in front of him without him noticing it? His head approached the place where his body and limbs were entangled, and he immediately found that he was not entangled in a net, but was stuck by a rope net that was as thick as a child's arm. The strange thing was that this rope net was crystal clear and covered with mucus. When his divine sense swept over it, it actually passed through the air as if it was nothing. F***ck. What the hell is this? Yu Qianqiu quickly released his divine sense to investigate, and found that he had actually broken into a canyon. This net seemed to be deliberately set up in the canyon to wait for him. Yu Qianqiu struggled hard, but found that the stickiness of this thing was difficult to estimate. Even with his cultivation, he couldn't get rid of it. Then, a feeling of numbness began to spread from his skin that was stuck, and the clothes that were stuck on his body began to emit black smoke and rot. Needless to say, this transparent rope net was highly toxic, otherwise it would not be able to corrode his immortal body that he had forged. After a moment of surprise, he suddenly felt a tremor from both ends of the transparent giant rope net. It seemed as though something was quickly climbing over from both ends of the rope net, and was quickly approaching him. Moreover, there was also a heart-palpitating, zhi-zhi, sound coming from it. It felt as though he was the prey, and there were two things fighting to hunt him. Yu Qianqiu didn't dare to hesitate. His whole body emitted a purple flame, and with a buzz sound, he burned a big hole in the middle of the rope net that was stuck to him, and he quickly dodged. He looked at the place where he was stuck just now, but there was a thick fog, and he couldn't see anything. He released his divine sense again to investigate, and found that there were two huge arthropods in the air, and they were quickly converging at the center of the canyon. Wind, rise. Yu Qianqiu let out a light shout, and held a ball of purple fire in each of his palms. A gust of wind immediately rose in the canyon, and the thick fog that pervaded the surroundings was quickly dispersed. The dim canyon immediately revealed its true appearance. Yu Qianqiu's eyes gradually widened as he looked ahead, and he seemed to be in disbelief. This was a large canyon that was 100 meters wide and hundreds of meters high. Although the canyon was wide enough, it still gave people a feeling of a thin line of sky when they looked up. On both sides of the dark mountain rocks, there were all kinds of colorful arthropods attached to them. Their bodies were either huge or growing steadily. Not to mention their huge bodies, they were all covered in hard armor. If they curled up and didn't move, just using divine sense to investigate would probably cause people to mistake them for rocks. No wonder when he used his divine sense to investigate the canyon on both sides, he didn't discover them. Following the use of the purple fire energy to create a gust of wind that whistled through the canyon, pairs of tentacles began to extend from the craggy mountain rocks. Disgusting worms that were as large as worms crawled out from all over the place. These pink worms were covered in mucus, expanding their disgusting circular mouths and making shio-shio sounds against the wind, as if they were hungry and wanted to eat. A circle of ferocious fangs constantly opened and retracted inside their circular mouths, and mucus like mucus slid down from their mouths. It was a horrifying sight to behold. At the bottom of the canyon, there were dense white bones everywhere. There was no lack of human bones, but most of them were the corpses of various animals. Some of the bones had already turned yellow and black, and some of them were already covered in a layer of moss. It was obvious that they had existed here for many years. It was unknown how many corpses and bones had accumulated in the canyon over the countless years. Some strange animals climbed on top of the various skeletons, constantly sniffing, as if they wanted to find some scattered meat on the skeletons to fill their stomachs. Yu Qianqiu frowned. He never thought that there would be such a disgusting place in the ruins of God. His gaze then landed on the large net in the middle of the canyon. Although he had burned a large hole in the middle, it did not affect his ability to recognize its full appearance. It was actually a giant spider web. Two big, fluffy, colorful spiders with a body size of 5 to 6 meters crawled to the gap in the broken web. After looking around with their big black eyes, they didn't find any prey. Then, they quickly spat out crystal-clear spider silk that was as thick as a child's arm, quickly repairing the damaged area. Whoosh! A ray of multicolored light flew out from Yu Qianqiu's hand and slashed at the spider web. A strand of spider silk was suddenly stretched out, and then it quickly bounced back. A flying sword was stuck on it, swaying. The two large spiders vigilantly stopped spitting silk and suddenly turned around at the same time. Their huge bodies climbed on the spider web as if they were flying, quickly rushing to the source of the earthquake. The two big fellows probably thought that they had caught their prey. The large spider that was closer naturally had the advantage of being in a favorable position. It was the first to reveal two light golden, curved, sharp teeth that were as long as a child's arm. He quickly clamped onto the flying sword and chewed it happily. With a ding sound, the flying sword was immediately broken into two pieces. It seemed to realize that it was not the food it had imagined, so it turned around and gave up. The flying sword that had been broken into two pieces swayed on the spider web. The spider that caught up with it pounced on the flying sword and chewed on it. With a ding, it similarly broke the flying sword into two pieces. It shook its head disinterestedly and turned around to continue mending the spider web. Yu Qianqiu, who had his eyes on the spider web and wanted to test its toughness, did not expect to see such a scene. He immediately let out a breath of cold air. The quality of the flying sword was not bad. It was given to him by Hui Yunlong, but he did not expect it to be bitten into two by the spider in just 2 bites. Oh my! What kind of spider is this? Its jaws are so powerful, and the spider silk it spits out is also extraordinarily tough. Even a flying sword can't cut it. Yu Qianqiu mumbled to himself. His eyes gradually brightened. He quickly took out the jade archive and found the one with the records of the various beasts. In the end, even after going through it a few times, he could not find the original form of the spider in front of him. This made him even more astonished. Logically speaking, such a powerful spider could not possibly be a nobody. Why was there no record of it in this jade archive? Could it be a new species? He looked at his surroundings. If he had not accidentally stumbled into this place, he probably would not have been able to discover them. He wondered how many years these fellows had lived in this place. Yu Qianqiu looked around and found that there were only 2 of these spiders in the entire valley. His gaze fell on the spider web. He felt that it should be of great use, but he did not know how to collect it. He then looked at the pale golden jaws of the 2 spiders. He felt that they should be of great use as well. Just as Yu Qianqiu's eyes lit up and a purple flame flying sword materialized, ready to slaughter the 2 spiders and pry out their jaws, he saw that the 2 spiders had already mended the spider web. Their heads arched together for a while, then they crawled to the other end of the spider web together. You're tuning in to the Journey of the Soul YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.